Going live. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Even though I'm talking to no one at this moment because I haven't shared the link, which I'm about to do, but here we are once again. It is our famous Sundays, world famous development meetings for the Portal Mountain. And today we are going to continue on with our usual casual development meetings where we we've kind of vaguely planned, and we do tend to carry on where we left off the last time, thematically, and just of note, we've been going for over a year now, almost every 2 weeks, and in that time we've accumulated a vast repertoire of language that we kind of have our own take, our own glossary, our own lexicon, if you will. Any word that we use, obviously we can't capitalize them during the live stream, but we do have special words that we use in special ways, most of which we attempt to stay as true to the original usage of the word. In fact, most times, if possible, we are taking a word that's used closely or vaguely to how maybe it could be useful, but it's basically useless in common usage of the word, and we try to bend it into a web of meaning, this lexicon which we've been developing, this language, to make it more appropriate and useful and powerful. So right. Don't be afraid about weird, strange words that we use or ways that we use them. If you have any questions, feel free to ask in the Portal Mountain lobby on Telegram. You can visit our wiki. There's a glossary, portalmount.in. So Portal Mountain. That's the website address. And let's get into it. What was our topic of the day? Is vaguely, generally speaking, we wanted to talk about the collapse of the ego stack, and how there is basically no support, there's no alternative in place right now, and we are so far along the process of commodification that people have basically nothing to fall back on. Like, whereas hundreds of years ago there was the commons areas,
and nature.
With Industrial Revolution, right, nature, the Industrial Revolution brought people into the cities, but if the city crashed, people can always flood out back out to the commons and the fields and all that. This doesn't really basically exist anymore at all. The knowledge is being very specialized and lost. So this kind of leads to the question, what do we do in a case like this where we're seeing we're reaching the limits of how far this process of commodification can go, and
we want to turn away from it. What happens?
Right, and turning away from it, of course, without an alternative is very difficult.
No, not just difficult. It comes with its own system of punishments and rewards, which how do I fucking say it? Without like it's like when you try to quit smoking, or when you try to do it, when you try to get rid of any bad habit without having a fallback as to what to do with that time, right? Now that you've removed the thing that you're used to,
right, what fills the gap?
What fills that gap? And oftentimes people return to their old habits mainly because there's nothing else that can accommodate the routine, and so
or the needs.
Well, yeah, this is why that's why it's a routine, and it's a part of the need. So there is a very real danger here too, in that since this is the way we've lived our lives, our whole lives, trying to sort of let go of our ego-based existence is extremely painful as a consequence if there is nothing to because now you've been isolated by the system to begin with, and now you've removed the connection to the system without reconnecting anywhere else. So instead of freeing yourself from the isolation, it's actually even more isolating. And that's this is the subject of the day, which we sort of going to go into. Roughly speaking, we termed it the Dark Night of the Soul, and we're going to go into the details of what it is and how it happens, and then what the model is suggesting as the alternative route to this consequence.
Right. So I want to set up the premise here a little better, just to try and give an idea of what we are attempting to deal with
See
here.
that flame? When I relit the cigarette, there's like a big spark flame.
Oh, yeah. The ego stack flame. So what is our current situation that we are trying to deal with? What situation do we find ourselves in? And I just want to kind of relate with anybody out there listening to this who feels that the world is in danger, so to speak. The world, quote unquote, capital W.
The civilization, not the world. The world will be fine.
Not the planet. I don't mean the planet. I mean, like, yes, civilization. I'm equating that. No matter which way you look at it, whether it's climate change or war, where people are going with this whole pandemic thing and the kind of totalitarianism of the mass media control and narratives, and the kind of lockstep that people find themselves in. So there's a lot of, whether it's cultural or ecological, there's so many things that seem like they're just going so wrong right now. And not only that, but our history, no matter how far back you go, the history is of collapse and cycles of collapse, because it's almost like civilization has been hobbled by this, what we call the problem, in which causes every new iteration to be like a Ponzi scheme, where you're building on top of nothing. There's really no foundation. There's nothing. It's all kind of floating in the sky, and it collapses. Like, we think of financialization. Like, we are so far into financialization right now that any kind of pullback on the availability of credit, and literally the whole our monetary system will collapse. The thing that we use to exchange goods as enemies with each other, as enemies, quote unquote, like we're not family, right? In that way that
we're functionally enemies.
we can launder our
Relations.
activities and relations, right? So it seems like a very perilous state that we're in, especially when it seems like we're approaching this thing right now, whatever they call the Great Reset, or to usher in the New World Order and all this kind of stuff. And it's just an iteration, a cycle of the same damn thing over and over again. This is not going to be a solution to technologically bind everybody to like identity chips and all this kind of stuff to control the masses. This is just an iteration of civilization. It's not a fix, right? And so this is kind of the climate that we're...
It's not a fix, because at the heart of it, what it is just another set of tokens, another set of virtue signals, another set of pitches and sound bites and a bunch of fluff that keeps the mind occupied in conflict of conversation, and then keeps the ongoing market system oiled up and greased up for its continued function, because it feeds off of that conflict. For each solution that the market provides, another trinket to the mental conflict, which doesn't resolve anything, and then the machinery keeps grinding along, with individuals falling off here and there, as a sacrifice to absolutely nothing.
Right. Yeah, so we wanted to get into bringing up again the zeitgeist, and then we wanted to talk about these ideas like a midlife crisis and what was its kind of counterpart, the dark night of the soul.
Yep.
And what this means in this context. So if we take all this, let's say, bad shit that's happening, or that we can recognize that's building up, this end of the commodification of all life, not the end, but the continuation, and we just keep stepping and ratcheting up into becoming more and more hollowed out as beings.
By that we mean even our mental life, the thought processes are getting externalized controls through social media.
Right.
For example, with political correctness culture, you have an invasive sort of like, you cannot think certain patterns of words anymore. You cannot. I tested this out. It was tongue in cheek, but the phrasing was "not all men," and boy, did that get an immediate response, despite the fact that its context was kind of humorous, and not at all serious. And anybody with two brain cells would have been able to see that. Unfortunately, the words themselves were the only thing that wound up stimulating the response. So it was kind of funny,
Right.
to me anyway. It's not to discredit the actual real life situations out there. This wasn't about that. It was a mere sort of like a litmus test to see if it's the concepts behind the words or the words themselves, and it's clearly becoming that the words themselves carry the people through whatever the extrinsic meaning of those words are, and
Yes.
they're not able to put anything of themselves into it.
Mm-hmm. And to even oppose that idea that, so let's say somebody said, "Oh, look, men are such, this or that, blah blah blah," and then there's a big discussion. "Oh yeah, you're right," and then you say, "Not all men." That puts a question mark of uncertainty onto the category of men, which is not allowed. You cannot have uncertainty. Uncertainty cannot be injected into the system. And this is kind of the problem.
Right. Or if it's injected, there's only one specific reason for it, which is like you're on the opposite side of it, and therefore you're
Right.
the enemy.
Right. So any questioning of that exactly is interpreted as if you are opposing and saying the opposite. You are an enemy.
Yeah, and in this way,
So it's very difficult to communicate.
You're tugged by extrinsic forces, not internal ones.
It's right. Everything's externalized. It's impossible to communicate with people heart to heart, as people to people. Not impossible, but very, very difficult. And
Well, there's no language for it. All the language is defined somewhere out there to mean this thing, that thing, the other thing, and so you end up speaking about this thing, that thing, the other thing, and never about yourselves or anything like that. That's the real consequence of it.
Mm-hmm. Do-do-do-do-do. Can't read because it's... Hey guys. Well, our days are fine, thank you. And
Good.
I believe that's Jack, UCLA drummer. Very
Yeah.
nice. Thanks, buddy. Thanks for tuning in. And for the suggestion about creative destruction as well, because we have this this whole civilization, quote unquote, these ego stacks, these hierarchies, controlling the lives of every individual that make them up. And
So interesting. Like, just this prompted a thought. Sorry
Mhm.
to interrupt. He was talking about creative destruction. Sorry, civilization would be like a creative destruction. Um, as it creates, it destroys far more than it creates. Versus the concept that Jack is kind of suggesting, which is more holistic and wholesome, if you will, where destruction is used to create. Now that's kind of tipping back into using chaos as the platform of creation, and having creation sort of return back to it, utilize it and return back to it in that cycle, which is it's a nice that is a nice um,
Mhm.
flipping picture. It's along the same lines as, say,
Right.
the branch.
So
and
you were
twigs.
talking about creative destruction being the removal of noise.
Yeah.
And so when civilization winds up, when a portion of it winds up, bubbles up to do something, get something done, it should then fall back into the foam of through from which it emerged, and that's the people themselves.
Right. So the question is that what do you call noise that you're removing? Because if you remove noise that is actually supportive of your underlying system, this is the bad reification kind of stuff.
Right.
When you push the garbage out to outsource your garbage, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you're doing that, um, the creative force is actually far more destructive in its nature than the intention, because it's so narrowly focused. However, if the noise that you remove are impediments to growth of the whole,
Mm-hmm.
right, then at all points it's just a healthy system. It's just
Right.
it goes from one moment of being healthy to the next moment of being healthy. It doesn't necessarily. So the removal is contextual, and it's never systemic. It's always in the moment. So one is a game, if you will, and the other is just bulldozing through.
Right.
And so you have creative destruction and destructive creation.
Hmm.
Not sure which one is which, but I think destructive creation would be the civilization part.
Right. So it's a good point though about destroying that which you depend upon, even though it's some kind of ego hierarchy and we must destroy the patriarchy and all this kind of stuff. If you are depending on it, how do you
That
manage to accomplish that without dying subsequently?
Yeah, and this is the catch-22 of the system itself. It uses this mechanism
Right.
for
So
itself.
we're in like this massive Chinese finger trap.
Yep.
And we're also seeing that the finger trap is exploding, whether we try to or not. It's just going to freaking explode.
And with that,
Well, let's take a short break then.
let's explode.
All right, we're back. Just a quick little break. Oh my God, the chat is blowing up.
Let's read that.
Okay, let's try reading it on this one. Maybe easier.
He's saying, well, yes. With regard to technically Mother Nature being the type of noise, yes, that's basically what we're starting from. It's all of the potential, and then we have the actualizations of the non-noise parts, which interact with each other, creating a different layer of noise, out of which another emergent layer comes up, which is not noise, and all of this can be detected in whatever perspective you're taking it from. So there's a lot of that thought
And
in it.
there's a very interesting distinction potentially between nature and civilization. You could kind of juxtapose them in taking civilization as this fallen entity, fallen by the fact that it stops returning back to the nature from which it emerged, and thus breaks off and breaks away. This is what we call breakaway civilization, and this happens in the heart of man, of each and every one of
And
us,
so this is
in which the head is chopped off and doesn't care about the body anymore.
And this is the metaphor of the death cycle with the ants, because the ants are all using their natural ability to communicate to reinforce their logistical
Right.
interactions, right?
We're talking about the death circle in which a pile of ants just keep going in a circle.
And
They've detached from reality.
They're detached from their colony because they're not returning back to the colony, right?
Right.
So in this metaphor, nature would be the colony itself from which they emerge to collect their shit, can come back to.
Right.
But somewhere along the lines, their pheromonal patterns created a path on the outside somewhere that does not lead back into that colony.
Right.
And all of a sudden, you have a spiral that is killing itself, despite the fact that it's using the exact same natural rules for itself. So it's not apart from nature, but it did disconnect from it on a different layer of it.
Right, and this is where we have to bring up complex adaptive systems and the layering of those different systems and the languages spoken at each one. Whenever you have a higher order, you have to, within that language, take into account the languages below.
Yeah,
Somehow.
not directly, but to the extent that you keep a functional relationship between them.
Right, and it's never perfect, and there is always uncertainty and
we can
growth and change and all
we
that.
can see examples of that in human experiences, especially pre-civilization ones, where the mythology did not have to reflect nature directly. Like the spirits and the trees and whatever were not like one-to-one comparisons. They were just elements in this ongoing story. Right, so it wasn't like you had to have a scientific, so to speak, exposition of this relates to that, this relates to this relates to that. That's not what taking it into account really means. It means that so long as you have enough above to account for the below, such that it is maintained, that is sufficient. Right? It's not meant to be like like an impossible project of accounting for everything.
Right.
At all. Like, at existence.
And not only that, we never had to really manage that emergence. The only things that do emerge are those that manage to sustain that from which it emerged. So in other words, if civilization continues to be a breakaway civilization, we will be popped like a zit off the planet, and shit will emerge somewhere else.
Well, yeah, the support, if the foundation is completely gone, upon what is it that we're going to step on at that point?
Right. And so that's kind of a big major theme today, if you will, this idea of civilizational collapse, which who knows what that can look like. And we can know what it looks like in the life of an individual because it's happened to many of us and continues to happen when especially like when somebody gains an intuition of the tree of life and all that kind of stuff, these complex adaptive systems and the necessity for connecting back down to create the loop. When that comes to you, it also it makes you very, very aware of the soul and the zeitgeist, as special words we've been developing. Very much aware of what's missing, of what has been commodified and externalized out of your being that would normally types of things have been generation to generation given to you.
A good test to see if it's something that has been commodified out of your life or if it's something that you are inherently bringing to your life is basically it's the relationship of its benefits to you. Like, are you spending that time just to keep yourself relevant within the system, or are you spending that time on growing within yourself? And oftentimes, almost all activity is actually a transaction between you and the system that gives you either the basic necessity, like time or food or something to that effect, or a social interaction, but never anything more than that. And should you desire something outside of that kind of a thing, it's brought into a question of, like, first of all, are you spending your time well, or are you wasting your time? So, like, being called lazy just because you don't want to spend your time working for a living, for example, which is actually, stepping back, should sound really bizarre, because nobody literally wants to work for a living. Everybody just doesn't want to end up in the shithole.
Right. We know what the punishment awaits.
But the mythology that you should be busy to eat to stay alive is what drives people to not see that as the main problem.
And this is normal due to an iterative process, even generation to generation, in which more and more has been commodified out of us and out of our control. More of our own power to act on the world has been removed, and therefore by
removed we mean it's been moved to selected channels, or so that you have to play the correct game in order to gain access to those channels, and the game itself acts as a filter to remove the actors that would change anything.
Right.
So that's what is meant by removed. So normal people do not have access to the media channels that the elites have. That's effectively it, and the elites have no interest in changing any of that.
Right, so this evokes the Chinese finger trap again. Like, we're kind of waking up into this stuck position, and even so, generations ago, as I was just gonna mention, it was easy to work a factory job and support a family and have all kinds of money.
Not easy, but possible.
Provide for your own education, for your everything. And the wife can stay at home and all this kind of stuff. Not to get into cliche, the nuclear family was normal, and it could be supported by a single working person.
Well,
right? But this has slowly been ratcheted against the individual.
The nuclear family was the final token in making sure that the community is no longer connected. It took the industrial age a long time to do it, a couple of 100 years, but the nuclear family was the last thing it removed from it did to remove community. It created households. It divided the communities out.
I see what you're saying.
Up into households, separating neighbor from neighbor.
I see what you're saying. And so you put that in kind of a negative light, but in modern terms, we can look back and say that's all that we have now is this nuclear family, just to hold on to some sort of power. and even that is being disintegrated. Right? Before we had the
Well,
commons,
social media.
we had the commons and the neighborhood and the community.
Well, and social media can compartmentalize each individual family member into their own re- reality tunnel.
Right.
So
Right,
even
right.
the household is
Yes.
no longer a unified.
So,
individuals
of course,
in the household
this
are no
long
longer
process
unified.
of commodification is this atomization process in which we are all becoming more and more helpless. And again, we're pushed to the absolute limit of commodification of life. There's nothing left to take. All that there is left is this iron prison compound where everything is controlled, and
look
you
at it.
have nothing.
And look at what happened in the actually historically in the 20th century. On the Huxleyan side, the American, British, whatever, Australian West, and on the communist East, all of these, all of them, every single one of them did the same thing, despite the fact that they have like such
Different
a
ideology.
different ideologies, and that is divide people into households. In the communist side
Right.
of things, it was actually the plan. It was an explicit plan to take communities and stuff them into apartments by force, essentially,
Right.
so that they could not no longer function as a unit. So that was done deliberately there. But at the same time, the same shit was sold under the pretense of capitalism as this is what the best things for you.
Right. So
regardless of which side that you landed on,
architecturally, it was all the same.
it is absolutely nothing is different. You are divided, and you like it because you're high, or you're divided and you like it because otherwise you die.
Right.
And look at what happens to people who reject these kinds of things. They're just hippies and homeless, like on the one side, and criminals on the other, and
Right.
it's and it's the same fucking garbage people on both sides. They're considered to be garbage, is what I'm saying.
Right. Right. This refuse at the bottom of the ego stack
Just shit we can throw into the fire
into
to
the
keep it going,
incinerator.
to keep the
Right.
energy levels up.
Right. 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 More for the rest.
Well, not more for the rest, more like enough for the rest for them to shut the fuck up.
Well, it's like the individual is counted as a liability,
Yeah.
not as an asset, and that's what I mean by when you get rid of the liability, there's just they don't drain. They're not a useless eater anymore, right? That kind of thinking. This is not the right thinking.
Do you know about Stalin's famous quote? It's one of his most famous ones.
Probably, maybe not. I don't know.
Death solves all problems. No man, no problem. That's the attitude. That's the attitude of the system. Stalin simply exemplified it explicitly.
Yeah.
And fuck me, man. My relatives, they fucking put him on a pedestal.
Yeah.
Idiots. Sorry, but
Well, a lot of people do. I know. And
sorry, but come on.
there. Okay, there's like, this is what kind of gets me is that all these intellectual circles and these Marxists and all this kind of whatever, wherever you go, there's such a this ideological a faith in ideology to solve these kinds of problems. And we need to. The chat is oh no, I'm going. I open Minecraft. Chat is getting away from us. Bulldozer, death loops. Term in economics, the third space. First is home, second place is workplace, third is the public domain.
It's interesting how dividing it is, eh?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you, again, like in our thinking in pre-civ, work, play, home.
Yes,
They're all the
yes.
same thing.
So this is a good point because the home, for example, the household, the nuclear family, and all this is an ideological structure created to suspend over top of whatever nature is below. So, just looking back to when with commons and community, and all kinds of things that can happen. by nature we can't identify them before they happen. Everything's emergent, right? But you categorize things down to this. Like at your home, you have the alpha, the beta, and the omegas, and then you have at the workplace the same thing.
Yeah.
Right. But these are the places you have these structures, and
then in the what do you call, the public domain, the relationship is just moved to the government part, right? So you got the alpha government, the beta business, and everybody else just got to play the role.
So that's
of consumer.
Thanks, Jack. That's a great point. Just to look at how atomized we've placed,
and how insistent the economy wants to be about these things being separate, and how persistent we are in saying nope, they are the same thing done to us on many different layers, and all of them serve the same purpose, is to divide. And we're just saying that they're doing this explicitly, and they're pointing this out.
I was just saying about like these academics and Marxists and leftists and anybody, even the right side of the spectrum, they all have their solutions, but none of them deal with what we're talking about. None of them deal with this ability to be so heavily commodified that you blindly walk into these social organizational structures without even knowing what you're doing. You're self-atomized and alienating those others as well, because you categorically, that's a bum on the street, this is that, like I'm above them. It's all a competition.
Well, your only interaction with the system is to isolate, right? Because all interactions with the system are with the system, and which isolates. And then the system interacts with them, they interact with the system, and then the system interacts with you again. So at all points, there's isolation. And with TikTok and whatever, this point of isolation is now on the individual people within a household.
Right,
which means
so it's just kept going.
So people are separated from each other in the household, and this is why you have your...
Right.
This is how you're sold about... This is how generational gaps are sold to you, essentially.
I love your emotions.
You got this!
And that.
And this! Sorry, I talk with my hands. We all know this, though, by now.
We're just watching ourselves on live stream. So there's your hand motions again. Da-da-da! Do-do-do-do! Yep.
I have strong opinions!
Right, so we've been pushed towards atomization. This gives us a hint of what we're being pushed away from, which is this networking community type organization-ish.
Yeah, like...
Right? Even considering a family as a network community type organization. Now that's been atomized.
The negativity of this, the hollowness of this, gives us the clue, the zeitgeist, if you will, as a collective of what is missing. And the parameters of the atomization details that it is the division that we need to tackle. So how do we tackle such division?
Right.
And the answer is not... We are not the providers of this answer. We are relaying an observation about this only. And the observation is that when it comes to nature does its thing from within. Like, it builds itself from inside to outside. It doesn't take the outside as the totality at once,
right,
but rather reflects bits and pieces of it more and more in a more and more complex way over time. So this is the reason
That's
for looking at it from a DNA perspective, giving a language of meaning to
now
to consolidate all of the variations of sound bites out there to a real reflection of them inside and grow on top of that, rather than being manipulated and shaped by extrinsic forces throughout life and then being discarded like a piece of garbage.
Now, slight counterpoint, it's not even really, but so this makes me think of the evolutionary process of neurological networks, and the fact that they are this type of overarching communication and throwing a whole body into lockstep using nerves, right?
Mm-hmm.
In which everything is
Coordinating.
coordinated.
It creates a clock-like device inside the body. Yeah.
Right. So we do see that type of thing in nature, but you're not going to see any of your organs or your cells start complaining.
And when they do, it's
Typically-
called an autoimmune disease. Disease is what it's called. When your autoimmune system starts to fight itself.
What I mean by that point is that this neurological network, it's tapped into a lot of things, one of them including the hunger response, which the stomach and intestine can send, and then the animal goes and gets food, and then suddenly everybody's happy again, like all the cells and organs, they're all happy, right?
Yeah, but they're
not being neglected.
But yeah, and in this case, their complaint is unified, right? The complaint isn't for themselves. The complaint is for the overall thing,
Right.
to continue, and the themselves benefit from the overall improvement.
Right.
So it's an indirect signaling mechanism.
We brought this up so much in so many details and different angles, but the problem of the breakaway civilization
Is ignoring this.
is this disconnect of the order from the chaos, if you will. Right.
Not taking the chaotic elements into the in a reflective manner within the ordered.
So
element.
like all that yin yang stuff, and in the Taoism, and so many religions will talk about this as love, right? To be present to the world around you and to care about it. And with that, we'll take a short break. Yep, and we're back. So, it kind of... It's annoying for me to see people with all their little, like, philosophy channels and, like, whatever, like presumptuously presuming to have some kind of answers or something in their ideology, but meanwhile it's just this mixed web of books and references. I'll read this book, read that, but they don't actually have an idea of what to do about anything on their own.
Right?
We're so fucking different than that.
I know I'm kind of doing this thing, but
like you don't find many people that will try to engage you directly, because they'll deflect everything with sarcasm and stupid like fucking irony and shit. They won't. They'll just cryptographically encapsulate their little philosophy.
But we also encapsulate why this happens in ours. This is that discussion. Without the recourse, without the falling back onto without changing your habit, without having something to fall back onto, creates a vacancy, which is almost always perceived as a painful response, right? Like you've lost something. And when it comes to all your thinking and all your mental processes, that loss comes with the loss of identity, and that is incredibly painful, I would think, to sort of to tell yourself you're not who you always thought you are, and to just
like
to just consider this.
If you smoke all the time and you're a smoker?
No,
Or what?
No. Like when we're talking about letting go of the ego, and why does the rest of the conversation that we are driving at does not come up in different channels. They will talk about how painful being egotistical is, being an egoist and whatnot, but then have no recourse as to what that looks like without the egoism. Right. What is the unegoic human even looks like to begin with?
Now, moreover, if you have a model established of what to fill that with, then can you engage in presence with to describe a narrative of here's our problem, here's what we are sensing, this is a model we can use, this is where it can lead.
Right.
Can anybody put that fucking picture together?
And this is why there's a language appropriation schema going on with our interpretation to add that layer of meaning, so that these discussions can have an actual
the model,
conceptual vehicle to drive through the terrain, if you will, metaphorically.
Yeah, so
speaking.
now we can talk about a lot of that, and we can set up stories of like, yes, this is our problem, that we're sensing that the world is on the verge of another cyclical collapse and all this shit. And moreover, maybe even we're ruining things past some certain thresholds, and how many species dying per day and all that. But what can we do? Yeah, my phone's gonna die. I don't have a
do we need
a
this?
charger. Not really, just it shows us that we're still streaming. But
Don't need this.
yeah, so
Shut it off.
save your power. Oh. Yeah, moving through the model that we've established to show that there is, like, this is what we've just talked about this stream. By establishing what we're all sensing, that shit is bad, we've had to establish this model, which we've been doing for the last year over live stream and interaction. And then the story is, what is the story? Because there is we're talking about the Institute, as we've called it. In other words, there's something that emerges out of this behavior we've been describing regarding the cognitive alignment window, the problem, and how to sort of put your cognition into maintenance mode for a second, and intentionally shine that light of focus on your being, even your very being, and the world and reality and all that.
The kind of maintenance one would put into any other extrinsic mechanical system.
That's a great word for it too, by the way, maintenance mode, because that's what it is. It's allowing the ability to update your cosmology, your ideology, what you think of as the map and model of your reality suddenly comes into question when you shift the cognitive window down to the mimetic, right? And this is what civilization is missing, and this interaction is how yin and yang, or order and chaos, actually interact. So without the breakaway condition, right? When you keep coming back and shifting the window back and forth, you're allowing the update, the maintenance mode. And the maintenance mode is a sensing of the data
And crucial,
of nature.
and crucial to understand here is that you do not lose the creative force pushing you forward to begin with. It's not a loss of humanity in any sense, because what we're not trying to say that, hey, there has been zero quote unquote progress in reality. There has been some movement towards like a more complexity, obviously. The issue is that this complexity is for nothing if the foundations are removed, which they are poised to be given the conditions that we're setting ourselves up for.
Mm-hmm.
So at the end of that, like, what is the point of such progress if we can't actually enjoy any of it at all?
Right. If we've progressed so far, yet everything is offshored, and with the snap of a finger,
And it's all
those
none.
ties are cut.
And it's gone. And it's so progressing to what?
And yeah, and to the point, this isn't how nature operates, as in you were saying, from within itself.
No.
This is how some kind of shell puppet operates.
Nature will shape you so long as you reflect yourself and it at the same time. Because if you neglect either yourself or it, one of them will destroy. Will get rolled over. What's he saying?
Just trying to think of how that Jack is talking about anonymity.
No. Well, anonymity is the name of isolation.
So, but this is a bit of a stretch, but the anonymity of the system in the breakaway civilization, detached and disconnected and laundered through systems like monetary, you never are held accountable to nature. You are allowed to break away and break off. Now that's a stretch, but that's interesting.
Well, no, this speaks
because
to,
you are anonymous to nature now.
This speaks to the delay we've caused by removing concerns of dealing with nature and exporting them to commodities, right? So now you don't need to deal with nature directly. You just pay for whatever.
Let's say you're paying for a steel pipe or something like that. The pipe manufacturer, the smelting plant, whatever, they need metal. They push off the reference to that to, the mining company, that's different. So it's like a constant pushing away of responsibility as fast and as far away from yourself as possible.
Yeah.
And what do we expect from this process?
If not to get railed over by the whole mechanism after the fact. Because what are you to the mechanism if something to steam through?
So
anyway,
I'm just wondering, like, just quickly, maybe we can just advance something into the near-term future of our little live stream here. What would it look like on a person-to-person people scale to see the what we call the artifact in operation, in play, and how do we recognize that as any different from what's going on in the world as a mess as it is, right? Because we are proposing a usage of a certain model to accomplish what we're talking about here, right? To address this disconnect, right? The breakaway, to unbreak the breakaway civilization.
Yeah, look, the metaphor to see here is that we find ourselves in our death loop, or death cycle already.
Many of them.
No, let's stick to one to keep it simple. We are in the death loop, and we're looking around, and we're seeing that we're treading the same sinkhole, if you will, treading the same territory over and over and over. The signposts are all repeating themselves over and over and over.
How would you know that?
There's a hill over here, there's a tree over there, there's a thing over here. There's a hill over here, there's a tree over there, there's a lake over here. And so on and so forth and so forth. This is the noticing part. Something is off. Because
now, because
everything an ant can't do that, but I'm just using that as a metaphor.
Right.
We can.
If we were in the
We
ant
can.
pheromone death circle,
Yeah,
just
we can
going around, which
see.
we are. So this is the
We have the
metaphor, yeah.
capacity to also oversee the system that we're in at the same time. So this is
Right.
we have the capacity to jump layers in
Okay,
cognitives.
so the paycheck comes in. You immediately spend it on rent. Now you have nothing for the next 2 weeks.
Over
the
and
next
over
paycheck
and
comes
over
in.
and
Now
over and
all
over.
your bills are paid, and you have a quarter of a paycheck left for until the next
Yeah.
thing. Now that comes. Now rent is paid.
And so on and so
So
on.
something
and so
is. This isn't how. This isn't natural, maybe, or.
Well, yeah, because all of a sudden, like, you have all of these potential abilities, but you're stuck in step 1, step 2, step 3,
Right.
step 1, and none of these other abilities, like, anytime you try to express them or whatever, they're like, nope. Which part of the step is this? Step 1, step 2, or step 3? Get back to work, and so on and so forth. So this is the death cycle that
Right.
all of a sudden people wake up to. Something is wrong. Something is off.
It's a death cycle, death circle. Death circle is the anti-analogy. Death cycle, I believe, would be probably.
Circle is the way it's on YouTube labeled.
Death circle.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So the observation is that the pheromones being used to reinforce the circle are not necessarily the signals that are meant to keep a circle running. They have a different role to actually play, but they're just being misused in the circle. And the idea that we're presenting
Yes,
is effectively is as a to reorganize all of these signals to reclaim the path back to the colony. It
sounds like reverse engineering
Right.
of the pheromone signal to say what could this have actually supposed to be used for.
From the perspective of already it being in the runaway process.
Mhm.
That's the key, because it's already.
Yes.
This is a perspective from the circle, not from the colony.
Right,
And a lot of people take this perspective to be the opposite way. They're looking at it as if they're in the colony and they're going to, and if they change something, that will go away. Wrong. That's exactly the opposite message. And
I see.
But because that opposite message, but because of that sense that that they're in the colony and that's what's going to be taken away, the response is pain, not I need to do this, but rather I should not do this. And that is the catch-22 that you were referring to. This is where it lies, in that we're already in the circle, so everything else seems, but we think it's a colony, so everything else seems to be like letting go of the colony.
Right.
Meanwhile, what you're letting go of is the march to death itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. That's bookmarkable. So, yeah, definitely interesting perspectives there. Like, if we feel like we are in nature or natural, in civilization is natural, we are the human civilization, we are struggling to the stars and all this kind of stuff. But meanwhile, we're actually disconnected from that. And I've tried making this point before. If we try using our current consciousness as people understand it, to go to Mars, to go to this, colonize that, we're doing a disservice to the universe, because we're basically exporting this alienating culture, which can only cause warfare, destruction. It can only destroy itself. And that's what we're exporting. This is the best we've got.
Who exported that before? Greece, Rome,
Right.
Britain.
Yeah. Right. So here's
It's the same pattern.
analogy instead, and it'll always be, okay, this is our solar system.
It was Christianity before. Now it's going to be secular, whatever the fuck the latest ism is.
So people are thinking about going to the stars for the same reason people were thinking about crossing the ocean. Meanwhile, they just exported a shit culture, which, I mean, it is what it is, but and the process of commodification has been so rapid and just keeps going, and this the myth of progress, as they say, that we progressed so much.
ironically stems from the Bronze Ages. So the entire the entire debate between the secularism side and the atheistic and the theistic side is about Bronze Age mythology, despite the fact that they're like, if you look at the atheistic Reddit, for example, they're like, oh, we don't like those Bronze Age myths. Congratulations, you're in one.
Yeah, cool note. I don't quite exactly follow. I don't know enough about Bronze Age mythology or anything.
The myth of progress started with civilization. Like, we're better than the barbarians.
So we've never talked about Bronze Iron Age.
Oh, we talked about it a little bit when...
I don't think we lined them up. I know Chronology of Spectacular Civilizations.
So it blends a lot
systems.
it blends a lot of it together, but Bronze Age would roughly translate to city-states, whereas Iron Age will translate to roughly imperialistic
So we never did
stages.
that. So by the city-state, we're basically talking about the first.
It's a small empire.
The first.
Yeah, it's a small empire in which land is the main division. This is ours. This is yours.
Right.
This is your plot.
And which everybody on there depends on the problem, quote unquote.
And depends on having access to the person with this land, the person with that land, launder.
What
you
I
don't
mean-
have access to resources. You
What I
have
mean
access
by
to people.
this is if you are,
Gatekeeper.
let's say, I don't know, what we had tribal before that, but this idea of the rite of passage of the adolescent into adulthood, actual adulthood in prehistoric time.
That's been inverted to...
This type of thing cannot fit into a system where you're raised up to categorically crystallize on certain things. And this is what we see in the discourse today, as we were talking about. Men do this, men are this and that, and men blah blah blah. But you can't say not all men. You that's not a legitimate logical tool.
Yeah, and to top it all off, the rite of passage is now perverted into the rite of passage for access. The rite of access.
Right.
And the rite of access is determined by how much of a cog in the wheel are you, how much of a cog in the machine you are, right? So this is a way of filtering you out by removing your ability to survive if you're not a team player, if you will.
Right.
So yeah, so the rite of passage is really like the allowance of survival, which is a completely perverted synopsis
and we
of,
can all
of the journey.
We all can end up doing whatever we want to do, and even testing those systems, and so we test them, and we end up being taken down a notch or two on the ego stack, right? Because you learn the punishment is like this and that, and even generationally and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, and your entire maturation process is now hijacked into what am I rewarded for and what am I punished for, rather than what do I understand out of this life.
Yes, so it ends up being like
disconnected,
like longing or lusting after some certain status in society, like to own a house, to own a car.
So those are the
to own this.
Those are the acceptable rewards, right? Those are the things you have to strive for according to the dogma.
Right.
To be successful, to be to get the token of good citizen or a good obedient citizen or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a journey of self. It's a journey of platitudes.
Right. Of externalization.
I'm not saying here. Hold on. I'm not saying that platitude has no room. I'm not saying that. We are social creatures. We need to elevate each other to some extent. That's hyperstition. To some extent, platitude and hyperstition are not different from each other. But platitude without the substance behind it,
right,
is what makes it so fucking death circling.
And what you just said is the yang without the yin.
It's always that.
Yes.
It's always going to be order without any reference back to the chaos that's going to cause this.
Correct. And with that, we'll be right back. Back at it.
And I guess we have actually enough background description to say that we can recognize where the dark night of the soul can happen by illuminating the whether there's only these death cycle going on, right? And within that cycle, you're being offered another signal to continue on the cycle, versus the kind of
Right, the trinket, as we call it.
versus recombining the signal patterns to find your way back to the colony, which is the artifact, as we would call it. We have enough of a kind of like an established metaphor to
Escaping the death cycle, or death
Yeah.
circle,
Yeah,
whichever you prefer.
it doesn't matter. Cycle and circle to me sound
So,
the same.
trinket versus artifact.
Right. And on top of that is the consequences of not having an actualized reestablished path towards the colony versus having one. And the difference between the two is the obvious one is one keeps you on the circle, the other one leads you out, right? But the path out also needs to be crafted really carefully, because you don't want to be stepping on people's toes on that path. Otherwise, you're just going to be run over by the circle. So that's kind of the playing field that we're working with.
Right.
And
So,
from there,
yes.
to demonstrate that the main point is to demonstrate that with the removal of that ego dashboard interface that you have with the system, without a fallback,
Catastrophic.
the isolation actually increases into a catastrophic sense. This is where shit goes from bad to worse rather than for better, having realized the way things are.
Right.
So you've seen the vision of this
Quote,
is wrong.
unquote.
You've seen the vision of this is wrong. You want to disconnect from this wrong, but you have nowhere to go to that is not wrong.
Right.
So you are disconnected from everybody. Now you're disconnecting from the one thing that is keeping you alive. Where do you go? Where without anything to catch you, there is no no ground to stand on, and so this
Right.
is what we would call a fall and a dark night of the soul. The soul being the negative space created by the workings of the system to begin with, so nothing has been filled yet. Right, so so there's
Yeah,
still that.
that's horrible.
So that's
It's
still
fucking
that.
horrible,
So
man.
that's still that initial pain, but it's coupled with a pain of loss of everything else that comes along with it, and now you have no identity, no reality, and nothing to stand on whatsoever. What do you do with yourself? This is what we would call a big issue for this.
Something we all have to face. Well, we don't all have to face it, but
There's the
this is
alternative,
this
yes.
is an axial hinge of the moment that we find ourselves in.
Well, at this point in time, there's a few options. One is a physical rebellion, an outburst of this negativity towards the system itself, at which point we can pretty much predict the consequence. The system is unhinged. It doesn't care, so it's just going to bury whatever the fuck is coming up against it.
Right.
The second one is a mental breakdown, in which, again, is an invitation for the system to try and fix you.
Right.
So this is where you get therapy. This is where you get all the psychoanalysis and all of that stuff, and mental illness comes into play, and all of that
Yes.
jazz.
And so-
not to diminish from those problems; they are real. What we're saying is that the consequences of those problems are being fed back into the system to reiterate the system rather than
Right.
solve the actual
It's
mental breakdown.
called recuperation. Recuperation by the system. So something, the body has given feedback into the system, up into the system, and that's been dealt with in a way, yet again, detached way.
Yeah,
And-
it will take corrective steps, not for the body, but for the system.
Right. Exactly. Like, oh, no, a new signal. Oh, damn! How can we quash this?
Or how can we commodify it? How can we
Make money off of it?
yeah.
Etc. Yeah.
Commodify just means turn it into dollar signs.
And these are just the thoughts of thinking people of any one of us potentially who is, business minded within the civilization, within the breakaway civilization. And again, that's the point, is that we are all competing against each other to come up with these solutions, which end up
To get ahead of somebody else in the circle, even though the fucking thing is going round and round.
And even though our only job, our problem that we're responding to is a recuperation process. In other words, that this system could stop or have problems, this is what we are like. We're sympathetic to the system to like, I will solve that problem business-wise, and you recuperate it.
Well, that's the thing. The system works through the zeitgeist because its entire operation is of recuperation, right?
Mm-hmm.
It only
Never-ending, yep.
It's a never-ending process of trying to fix things that it fucked up in a way that fucks up other things
Right.
that require fixing in the way that fucks up other ways.
And it's amazing
on
that
and on and on
we've
and on
gone
and on.
this
And it's
far-
forever.
We've gotten this far without destroying ourselves.
Well, this is what we're saying. We're at that point because the last corners of
We just haven't had the technology yet to be able to completely destroy ourselves, which we do now. And honestly, probably most
the last
civilizations
corner
go
is
that way.
The last
So
corner is controlling the next thought, the next thought, the next thought, which is what social media is slowly but surely shaping.
right.
So now, when you think wrong, you're either outcast by PC culture or PC police. So it doesn't matter which one. The effect is about the same.
Right. So yeah, I just wanted to point out that this Dark Night of the Soul thing, where it's coming from, is the fact of the breakaway civilization in which we're all educated, quote unquote, schooled. We're schooled into it, to create this disconnect, so that we could be the first Bronze Age citizen, so that we can live in the walled city. This ability to take a category and reify it down the stack without giving a shit about what your mind map model just did to the body, to nature.
And the consequence of doing it that way, whatever. None of it is
Right.
connected.
So that's this breakaway civilization. That is the breakaway of breakaway civilization.
As
Is
in,
that we
it's not
all
connected.
do that categorical crystallization, which runs over each other. With all this this political correctness and all that. This is now running over each other. Like we can now feel it viscerally. Like I guess that's a blessing maybe that it's out in the open.
Well, what that is doing is it's exposing the actual elements of the system at the seams, right? It's exposing that we cannot actually function in a unified way the way we are, and it's exposing that
Right.
the only way to
Yes.
function in this broken state is by recuperation of a grander system, which uses itself as a tautological, like, see, you can't function without me. And it feeds right back into dividing and dividing and dividing. And the effect of the dividing causes it to go, see, you need me, whatever me is at that point in time.
Right. And this just a thought comes up. The fact that we've been able to talk about biological sex and mythological gender in the last, 3 or 4 episodes, let's say it's come up quite significantly, is that we can point back to this cognitive alignment window and the problem of breakaway civilization, and we can point directly back to it, how this hurts and neglects the body. The mind, with its cancer, just neglecting the body. All of us, we can feel it, right? If we keep that in mind, we can talk about any subject and damn be any attempt to cancel, quote unquote, or this or that.
Well, what would
whatever.
you be canceling at that point? Right? What would you be canceling at that point? If you established the mythology, if you established the relationship to the templates of biology, clearly...
Right. You'd be canceling the body itself, trying to.
Yeah, like what would you be doing?
Representation, presumed representation.
Right, which lines
Humbly
up
presumed.
which lines up with, ironically, toxic masculinity, the destruction of the female concept, the destruction of nature, the destruction of the mysterious, the destruction of everything that cannot be spoken, as if it doesn't exist. And that is, if that's not a breakaway from...
And yet from which all speech emerges.
I've seen arguments online stating things like, it's not proven that nature has the better, is the best way to organize things. And and my only thought to that person is like, dude, we are 4 billion years into the making and it works. Only with us interfering does it not. What are you talking about?
Oh, snap. Oh, snap.
And the reason it doesn't work with us interfering is because our cognitive capacity is limited. It's limited to a set number of things. Because it's like at any given point, which can be flexible or crystallized, but limited.
Right. There are special cases of that in which there is the flexibility built in, because we have to communicate through solidified word structures, through harmonic resonance.
Well, this is
through
where
the
metaphor comes in. This is where learning actually comes in, because we learn through applying similar things to dissimilar things and seeing the similarity and pattern, gaining the isomorphism, gaining the intuitive metaphor linguistically and conceptually, and move on from there and build on top of that newer structure.
Okay, so we're talking about that literalism, which came up a lot. We harped on that big time.
So I'm harping on this in a little bit of a different perspective. If we go a step back into the neurological operating system itself and the Quine relay and everything like that, the polymorphic Quine relay, which also reflects other languages within itself, right? So the idea of being able to write an entire rock song that is also a functional program that does computational steps within the computer
Yeah,
itself.
it's like a metaphor,
So like
an
yeah.
analogy.
So we have one piece of code fitting in two roles. Now expand and expand and expand upon that idea, and what you get is an idea of like this minimal system that does reflections only of whatever, re-reflecting, 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 re-reflecting external stimuli, re-reflecting internal stimuli, expanding reflections of reflections internally, over and over and over and over and over again.
This is the funhouse, and the interesting
and
part
of course
about
it's always going to work on metaphor. It's got to.
The interesting part about it is that that's one way of seeing what allows the whole self-referential net to be breakaway.
Yes,
is the fact that it can do that.
Right. So if the network is stuck on the extrinsic stimuli, the songs, the other interpretations of itself that it brings into it, and then takes those as to be the sole reality without the internal mechanisms that reflect all of this back out to begin with, without taking it, mainly just without considering that, not talking about like detailed mechanics here or anything, just the ability to recognize that fact alone causes
and
a
what does
breakaway.
that look like? Because this is what the artifact is introducing in a lot of cases, is that self-referential introspection about that I am a being constructing a reality as I go along. And when you see this becomes part of your Hall of Mirrors.
It's actually...
Your House of Mirrors has this mirror in it, which is actually part of the body and out into nature, correct?
One of the main distinctions where we say, we've said this a lot earlier on, but it's relevant now again, is that the system, by its nature, being all it's extrinsic, about the extrinsic stuff, which is explained by what I was saying about how you can transform the intrinsic reflective loop into other things like the song or the recipe or whatever that get also encoded.
Right.
The system will be all about all of these externalities without reference to anything in without the reference of that reflective mechanism. So they're just the mechanisms out there.
So this is like the most core notation of that there is a meta. This is the core of where meta exists.
Whereas the model flips this around and says all of this are actually internal reflections moving outwards. And so because of that, there's nothing that is not just another reference to itself. And so by definition, the model can only ever refer back to itself and how it does it, not what that is.
Right. And the content, in other words.
Yeah. And in doing this, you actually introduce an extrinsic reflection, conceptual one, of that internal reflection process, and that's the difference. That's the main difference in that even though it's external...
So you do get another, just like the other mirrors, however, it's a mirror about the inner, that does the mirroring and the whole setup in the stage show.
And also ends up reflecting back on and commenting on those extrinsic elements through itself by saying, this is a reference to myself, this is a reference to myself, this is how it's...
so complex adaptive system layering would have this as a meta layer kind of below, if you will.
Yeah. So introducing the artifact about that to the external mechanism is...
Correct.
It is the isomorphism that we're discussing that binds all of the layers together back to one whole system.
Yeah. And out through that, even lower.
But this system is the model because, again, it is entirely restricted to self-reference and can never actually make commentary about the...
And this is also what makes it frustrating to teach and to learn, if you're intentionally trying to do so, is that it
starts out there.
Imagine like the Tao Zen master or whatever giving a cone or something. It's meant to kind of snap your mentality so that you observe or feel a paradox, and that paradox hopefully leads towards something inward.
Right, like the self-reflecting mechanism that illuminates what caused it to be the a paradox.
Right.
How you arrived to in
Right.
it. By your assumptions, you led yourself to this road. By your assumptions, you led yourself through that road. You crossed these two things together, and you created the paradox. All of these self-reflecting things is what
Right.
the point would be. The artifact is going to stay just another artifact outside, but its causal effect is it's important. And if it doesn't have that causal effect, it'll remain an alien artifact to begin
And
with.
in most cases, any artifact is almost nothing without some sort of guide.
Right, and that's the point we're trying to make, is in that losing the whole ego stack without the fallback of guidance as to what to do with the lack of the reward punishment system to go by. Yeah, like the whole point of that discussion is to say, like, if you don't have that,
right?
you only get you only really get one response from the system back, which is pain, which is the pain of disconnecting from the system, being the identity of your survival to begin with, or the thing that keeps you alive. So if you disconnect from the thing that keeps you alive, of course it's going to be fucking terrifying.
Right, and that's dangerous, of course, and it helps to have somebody to further point towards your body and the body and your environment around you,
Yeah.
and all these things that matter that you should pay attention to. Don't drop everything.
So this opens up two
Right.
discussions, and the first one is the charlatan, and the second one is what is not a charlatan. So we've touched on that before.
Right.
But
And I think it's very important.
the reason is because this is the breaking point, and it's the point at which one is most vulnerable, because they do see the problem with the system, so it does mean that they don't necessarily want to replug into it.
Okay.
But then when the easy alternative to ease the pain is offered that looks lucrative and seems to address the points via tokens, right? This is the point at which the charlatan is actually at its most in its element, because the charlatan is just a collector, right? Lacking grand mastery, it's a collector that just collects and hoards adherents, essentially. Whatever
Mhm.
its trinkets are for
Right.
collection.
Stuck to the system.
And so they're on the prowl, of course, for this vulnerability to sell it the trinkets so that they can continue their operation. Which
Correct,
means
right.
for you, that would mean more of the same, and therefore another shit show.
Yeah, it's a really interesting discussion about charlatanism, and like I was saying earlier, I think this is maybe one of our main products. And if I were to sell
Charlatanism is our main product?
no, yes,
No,
yes and no.
The distinction.
Knowledge, the model of charlatanism.
Yeah.
Knowledge of the charlatan. Because what do we offer in a world of people, quote unquote, awakening and trying to organize, but a clear view of who is like
Awakening and
really
organizing,
doing
yeah.
it, and who has fallen off to the side and
Is trying to recuperate for the system and detract
Right.
from the path.
And so the network is big. This is the planet Earth. There are so many people out there, and not only that, but if we can solve this problem for the network, we can bring in so many people who think that, they're just religious nuts. You're Bible thumpers. You're this. You're that. This is the system to tell charlatanism from guidance to the real artifact, right?
Yeah, the one that points out that this will bring you more of the same rather than move
This
you away
exactly,
from
and this is one of our main products, and that's why I was bringing up how it kind of unnerves me or it ticks me off about these philosopher type people running their channel and just leading people, but
They're detracting from it.
their apprehension of the situation is cryptic. They will never engage you as to what to actually do about any of it, right? Their model is
or they'll try
incomplete.
or they'll try to sell it. It's like the round of questions I got from Zoom is like, what can this help me with in my build my shed? How can this do this?
Right.
How can this and that? Well, obviously, if this is the kind of answers you're looking for, you're not asking. You're not having the same conversation.
However, coincidentally, yes, like the presence and a paying attention and a learning mode, putting yourself into maintenance, aka learning mode, that will help you build a shed. It'll help you do it. It'll help you be a living
right. But the question
being.
but the question is what kind of laundered meaning does this have to me? Like, how can I gain more funds to pay for
Right.
this, to pay for that? Which would do what?
Yes.
Which would do what? It would
Reinforce.
only perpetuate more of the system.
Exactly.
So how can that answer?
Right.
be
Yeah,
correct?
you can't give an answer to that because it's an incorrect motivation.
It's totally like left field.
And with that, we'll be right back. And we're back. What were we talking about?
What were we talking about?
Yep, charlatanism.
Yeah, we were
Of course.
talking about mainly
Versus
that,
guidance.
mainly that
Trinket versus artifact.
yeah. And then the idea was to kind of sort of delve into how can you recognize one versus the other given the model that we're discussing. So one of the main tip-offs actually is reinforcement of some kind of hierarchical structure of the universe.
Right.
That is like one
Okay,
of the
okay.
that is like one of the dead giveaways that something is off.
In other words, breakaway, because we don't really see that in nature. This sort of fiat arbitrary hierarchicalization.
We see fiat, it's just not arbitrary. Fiat isn't part of nature. Like, for example, your thoughts have fiat over your body. That's still part of nature.
Yeah, and I understand like the silverback or whatever, gives an expression and this and that, but it came from somewhere.
There are, look, no, what I'm saying is that there are, in the strange loop, there will always be a layer higher that pushes down via fiat. So, for example, the way you interpret a word
Right.
or any of those things, there's
Okay.
still a fiat.
True, which is that when in a layer talking complex adaptive systems again, when a layer is emergent with its own new language, it's speaking something that's foreign to what's below. And in that way, the below layers cannot really...
They're patterned
just
by
like,
it.
that's
how it is, yeah.
you tell me what to do and I do it, kind of, that's what this means here.
Mm-hmm.
So one layer from above, an emergent one, speaking, quote unquote, to a below one through
Patterning.
Patterning.
It's patterning, which means it
below, right?
affects its structure.
Right.
It physically manipulates. Not physically, but it manipulates it to some degree.
Right.
To do its bidding.
Something is happening at a higher layer, signals are sent, and things move at the higher layer.
Like my muscles can't say no to my brain to not do this, for example.
Just wait 1 second. When a signal is sent on a layer, let's say that is emergent of a higher layer, and things move, like a language is spoken, say spoken words, and things move and rearrange because of that language, right? That moving and rearranging is inherently the movement and rearrangement in certain specific language patterns of the layers below. It just is. That's what's emergent up, is that order.
Right. This is the this is what we would refer to as reification or upload or download. Actually, this is the download process when you encode a signal to the same layer, right, using a layer below, using a specific pattern. You download the message onto the carrier, you let it flow through the carrier, and then the pattern is reassembled again back into whatever message or signal you wanted it to be.
Right. And we could quickly use...
And so that's resonance in itself. But the mechanism to cause resonance would be fiat.
I think it's
and the
maybe
projection itself is the wake.
Prudent to quickly throw the analogy of the OSI model, the network model of computers talking over the internet, where a packet of data, of information is encapsulated over and over again, encapsulated.
Into different, into more basic patterns. So one pattern would be, find me the computer on address X. The next packet would be, well, to get to address X, we need to go through places A, B, C. So
right.
Send this whole thing to packet A,
right,
and encode inside the packet that it needs to be sent through packet B, through gate C, and
essentially
so forth.
Just look up how a packet traverses a network of routers on the internet,
on the wire,
and you'll see. Because it is wires, and a router has only a few neighbors, right? So it only knows it's going to go here, there, or there, and that's a different level.
But it needs to go 4 hops over.
That's what I'm saying. So when you draw the line on a network level, it's going from this host to that host, right? But which router it's going to go to, and then which friend of that router, and which friend of that router,
and so on and so forth, to get to the final destination.
It's different.
So the difference between the final destination, which is encoded by an address, to the next neighboring destination, which is also encoded by an address, but the secondary encoding says also keep going.
So we are analogizing a process where here's one example of me moving my hands. When I send the nerve signal, and all these cells move, and all these tissues, cells, molecules, atoms,
which
they move in kind of
electrons.
They move in this kind of lockstep, if you will, much more real time than even a computer, which is trying to simulate this effect by encapsulating a packet of data into different levels.
It was fed to it.
Right, so it's like this process, which we see the same thing there, nothing instantaneous, but it really is a fluid singular motion of everything below from the layer above.
So the point really is that to some extent, not only are we subject to the forces that come up through nature to us, but that we exert a force down upon nature through our ability to think and conceptualize and whatnot, and to cause these concepts to materialize to some extent in the real world. This is what we call hyperstition, when you thought materializes into an actual thing by being there.
To be distinguished from superstition, because
Well,
by having a good model,
super-
by having an isomorphic model at the top.
A superstition.
Top layer has an
A superstition would be to take a collection of prefabricated things, right, and to not create, not to like push it forward towards another layer of emergence or anything like that, but just to like play around with the concepts as if they are the end all and be all of everything, and there's no past. There's no past past that.
Superstition and hyperstition difference being what type of a model you have. One being an isomorphic, or one being a breakaway model.
One allows the reality of the words to emerge. The other one does not care about the emergence process whatsoever. It just assumes the reality of the words.
Yes,
and
that's what I mean by an isomorphic
and
model.
isomorphism be damned.
Correct.
It doesn't matter.
Correct. And
that's the cycle.
This kind of points back towards what we were talking about with the polyquine and the fun house, as we call it, the hall of mirrors.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have access to one of these mirrors, which mirrors the self, the thing that mirrors that's creating this whole fun house itself, then you can have access to hyperstitional type of modeling, because you are taking into account that these layers are happening.
You're taking the account of the reality of those layers and what they actually do reflect, as opposed to having a superficial extrinsic model navigation that has no reflection whatsoever as to its origin or anything like that.
Right. And again, this is the ability of civilization to break away is that funhouse polyquine issue, that it doesn't have to have that mirror, that one mirror that mirrors the self.
And again, right? This is the litmus test for charlatanism, because again, there's a vulnerability involved in this is all being wrong, but not seeing where does it need to go to be right. And the charlatan will effectively continue the superficial elements and detract from further inner reflection world. Right. And so keeps it on the surface.
Okay, so here's another model point regarding degrees of coherence. The charlatan.
Well, you don't move through them, that's for sure.
And we're not. Right, you wouldn't get past participation with a charlatan at the helm, but the charlatan themselves is that participation. And I just want to note that charlatanism isn't a bad thing, necessarily. This is what participants do. If you are a charlatan for an organization that is overall good, that's how it slots in, right? That's fine.
That's a fair point.
But membership is different in that you have these access to be able to talk about breaking apart the questioning everything. And like you said, this isn't the be all end all, and we think we're wrong, but how can we move it towards being right? That's our basis, our baseline, instead of I know this cool occult group and whatever, and we're like figuring out the universe, and like you just got to do this and this, and then you have superhuman control over reality.
I'll give you the analogy of a charlatan in 2 easy steps. Sniff this line of coke. It'll make you feel better.
Okay.
This is my
Up your hand.
Just do it. Here's some coke. just hit the dopamine.
Okay. Wow, man, you're totally right.
Just hit the dopamine receptor.
You were right.
And everything opens up, right? Like this is nothing but marketing.
Right.
And
right. Which we need marketing, right, too. Like, but then that's why I was trying to cut the edge in. Like, the charlatan isn't bad necessarily, and I think there are two types of charlatans.
But if somebody's offering you coke right off the bat,
there are two types. let's distinguish. Okay, they
Think
probably
about
know
it.
that drugs are, don't lead to good things. Two
My
types of
point is not the
charlatanism.
coke, though. My point is the dopamine hit.
There is the naive charlatan, and there is the malicious charlatan.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
The malicious one is what
Callous.
you're talking about.
No. Naive is the malicious because they're just going to thrash. They are.
Sorry.
The more they fight,
We've brought
the
these
closer they
terms
are.
up. We brought these terms up. So you're going to have to, because I completely forget, callous.
Callous is the most dangerous opposition because they just don't give
They
a
don't even
flying
care. Yeah.
fuck. The people that are thrashing the most are actually the most susceptible to understanding the problem because nothing they're doing in their system is actually giving them hope anyway.
Malicious, callous. Did we have this in a chart?
Yes, we have this in the...
'Cause it's been a while.
We have this in the pitfalls.
Right. Which we just made a diagram of that, didn't we?
We did a Excel sheet. I did an Excel sheet somewhere.
Yeah, I think we scooped that though. One of the last things we did last time was go to Portal Mountain Wiki, and of course at the top we let's bring everybody along with our fun adventure. At the top we go to diagrams, and then which is an imager link. And I thought at the bottom, like, this was one of the things.
There it is, yeah. Coherence dynamics. So here's when you see...
I'm just going to save and open. But yeah keep going.
So you have malicious and you have adversarial. So adversarial is like... That is lines up with the bottom of the ego flame.
Right?
Adversarial elements of any other system, if you will, are the people who are effectively are like used as the cannon fodder. Go fight for our cause. If you die, you die. Whatever.
Too bad.
Too bad, so sad. Malicious is more like planning. It's more conceptual in nature. So this is where you get your...
right. So where are we again?
So malicious is where you get like your management. So it's the managerial level. So this is where you get your...
now,
the people that sort of... what was that? Ferguson?
Okay.
That was the town? Do
interesting.
you remember Ferguson? So in Ferguson there was that white power candlelight lit demonstration of some sort. It's when that chick died the year later.
Fergus, maybe. I've heard. I know. I'm probably know.
So these are the people that like would take it upon themselves as a job to rally for the cause.
Right.
They will not throw themselves into the fire. They'll throw others into the fire.
Of course.
For the ideological basis. But what they why they're there and why they're malicious is because they stand to gain from the callous. The callous doesn't give a fuck, right? And so subverts, and so
right.
is
it's what they've set up, their archetype of how it works.
And so all they do is they pull the levers of the malicious to direct them into like, okay, so this is happening,
right.
This is how we should oppose this, feed them this garbage, decimate this propaganda, decimate that propaganda.
Via dashboard.
Right. Reward punishment. They reward them with this propaganda. So they reward the callous and then they punish the malicious for disobedience.
Right.
And in that sense, the callous is like you'll never reach it. But the adversarial is the person who has the most to lose from continuing on through the cycle. And so they don't, even though they're the most butt-heady, if you will, like the first line of opposition to the model, they're driven by pain. They're in the zeitgeist without the recourse, and so to them, having the recourse is
I
the
think
is the this speaks to why religion works on the vulnerable. This speaks to why
right. Well, it seems like the masses oppress themselves.
yeah, like a lot of this is tied into it.
Right. Right. And I think it's interesting to juxtapose the coherence with a sort of negative reflection of coherence, and like how bad into quote unquote evil that we can go.
Yeah, and the war, the further you go, what you get is less emotional. The opposition is less emotional,
Right.
and becomes downright inhuman.
Now we
Like the callous part of it is entirely mechanical.
of course what we didn't bring up here.
Like the if-then rules for the callous, they're just that. They don't give a fuck.
Right.
And you can find, and the thing
a
is,
speeding ticket. Oh my God! Elon Musk got a $200 speeding ticket. Who gives a fuck? Right. Oh, these. I mean, you lose your license eventually, supposedly, or whatever. I'm just throwing out names, but
what,
like,
Elon Musk
does a
losing
little
his license? Does
does
that
a
even
little-
make any sense to
does
anybody?
a little tiny punishment? No.
Look at the proportions of it. But even there, look at the thinking that brought you to the statement. It's about reward and punishment.
Yep.
But this was adversarial. So even though we're plagued by the same problem, you and I personally, we just used that
Sure.
same analogy of reward and punishment. It's like, who gives a shit? Don't give them the reward.
Adversarial.
Yeah, don't give them the reward. We are we are looking at this from like, I want to fight this shit, right? And this is the spot of like where you might be open to. But depends on the pain level, I guess. What are you fighting for? What is the fight about? Like, because you are fighting, you can actually take in the parameters of the fight. You were on the ground. So
Right.
obviously the one that in the mesh of things is going to be the most susceptible to being aware of it.
And when you mention that,
When you mention
on the ground,
when you manage everything, but why would you ever go there? Especially if the callous malicious relationship is strong, which is what happens in the authoritarian
Right.
states.
right? So it's like a elite managing a corporate managing the masses who just fight each other.
Fascism.
But yeah, this kind of this laying this out just kind of made me think about the participant guest. I guess we have it here, although this doesn't. I'm trying to line it
Well,
up.
remember, this goes from model to system. This is the biggest dichotomy out here.
Right.
Starting with self and system othering, and then the pitfalls in between them, keeping the challenge, the roles of each side, of where how to deal with the situation. So with insight, the discouragement comes from the callousness of the rest. Right? Like if you, with insight, you see that callousness, and that is insanely discouraging. Right? When you're just on the level of discipline alone, all you face from the malicious people is incessant condemnation for not being one of them. Right? You're not one of us, so you must be one of them. This is that whole
Yeah.
not all men situation.
And you're kind of stuck into it.
Right. So I face
Less so than through insight, just being discouraged simply, but
yeah, and then when you're dealing with just being accountable, all you're facing is hypocrisy because people are adversarial, and that's the level you're perceiving anyway. So like you're also, it's a matter of perception. It's a matter of you're not necessarily lining yourself up to face that situation, but as your coherence arises, you start to see the adversarial being part of the malicious framework, being part of the callous framework as you go farther up.
So let's walk upwards quickly on one of these. So as a participant, having a feeling of that people are hypocrites, they're all a bunch of hypocrites, and therefore it's kind of
And
like
yourself.
it's
You see
tough.
it in yourself.
Fine,
You as a participant, you're also your own adversary.
of course.
And,
But, okay,
and,
so-
and the self is the participant, and your other self is the adversary.
So the challenge is to be accountable and not to be a hypocrite, right? And so you're
to
seeing
move from the pitfall, yeah.
right. So you're seeing this as a big downer, this hypocrisy of everybody.
And
Moving-
everybody else to you is adversarial. They're opposing you. They're
So-
always they're directly opposing you.
So moving
Like,
to
why are you doing this? Shouldn't you be at work? Why are you meditating? Shouldn't you just wash the dishes? Why are you?
okay, wait.
Just random shit.
Hold
like
on.
that.
People who are the typical atheist and saying, like, oh, you follow
Ooh.
Jesus, but yet you still have an iPhone or whatever they'll say. They think it's hypocritical, or like, you still follow capitalism even though or whatever, or you think that the world is just
Or the opposite. What do you mean Jesus was not a socialist?
So this is a pitfall here, in which you're seeing that, and so I'm thinking in a manner of a participant, like the atheist type cliche trope, being like surface level, they're not doing what they say. So the Bible and Jesus, oh look, he's so great and all this, but yet that mentality disappears when you move from participant to membership, right?
Mm-hmm.
That mentality disappears because you see what is being attempted. You feel it. It becomes a part of your being because something is shifted.
And so the story is no longer about your hypocrisy, but rather your own shortcomings, or where you see yourself
Right.
needing more work and improvement.
Right.
And
yet
there's
deep,
no hypocrisy
deep down,
in that.
deep
There's-
down that
there's
there
learning in
is
that.
a reason and a connection for the attempt itself,
Right.
in which the atheist is stuck never attempting.
And so
Potentially- not
and,
the atheist,
and
but
so and so the charge of hypocrisy
the guest
moves,
actually.
Yeah, and so the charge of hypocrisy moves to the charge of condemnation, because as you're progressing through, you are obviously not perfect. Like you're progressing towards something, you're not yet that thing,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so by not being that thing yet, you're now condemned for not living up to the level. So it's basically, it moves from being discouraged one way by the system to being discouraged in a different level.
And again, from the experience of the person raising up a level from participant into membership and experiencing this condemnation, it is you who are condemning others for not knowing what you know, because you've seen some shit, like it's gone on where that mirror, the mirror in the funhouse, which reflects the self, has materialized to some extent.
Yeah.
And you now know that
and that is a pitfall for yourself,
thing.
yes.
And
that
so
is-
you will judge others. So that's what
that's
we
a
call
two-way
it.
street, yeah.
That's why we call it a pitfall. And I wanted to give this from the perspective of somebody raising up the layers of coherence,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, so you are yourself in the pitfall of condemnation others for not being disciplined as you are about the hypocrisy and the
Or
accountability.
as you think you are.
Yeah.
Right.
But on the counterpart is that because you're now behaving differently, given your realizations, that you're no longer part of their in-group, and therefore you're condemned for that. And so there's a condemnation
Right.
phenomena going both ways.
Which kind of pushes you up, maybe. Ideally.
Well, this is the point of discipline. The discipline is supposed to not only illuminate their condemnation of you, but your condemnation of them, and only in that case where can you potentially have any kind of insight.
Right.
Because without realizing both sides of the coin, what is the insight if not that?
And just of note here to attach again, when you're doing these types of condemnation, we're talking condemnation, you're really othering people.
Yeah.
right? And ideally someone can show you, look, you're condemning somebody just because you think you know things because you've seen shit, and I know that you have. You think that you can put them as other and below you, right? But this interferes with the natural organization in complex adaptive systems.
Right, and hence it wouldn't. It would be a failure of discipline in itself, and the feedback from condemnation is effectively meant to demonstrate the folly of itself.
So
Right.
we were talking about
So the entire so actually, I would venture out to say that the most painful exercise of this model will lay in membership because of that, because this is where both sides really collide and thrash against each other in terms of
because you got some meat to hold on to.
right, and both fall to the both will fall victim, so to speak, to the side of the other and become malicious towards
Typically.
each other. And you see this in like my go-to example for this is the sectarianism in Buddhism, where you do have an actual DNA body of understanding, and yet you still have superficial bickerings about the approach you take to that DNA and how it's rearticulated into the phenotype. And so you'll have the less disciplined will be more sectarian and malicious to each other, and the more disciplined will try to reintegrate all of the different approaches.
Right.
And this is that litmus test, and it's funny because accountability then plays a role in a different sense, even though it's been quote unquote surpassed as a obstacle. It now plays a different role as saying, okay, I'm accountable to making sure that my discipline lands me away from condemnation and away from maliciousness, and move all of that up into insight instead of across
Right.
into the
Yes.
landscape of
And so it still
give and take.
it still is a thing that you have a model to which you're being holding yourself accountable to. It's just that it's now become a higher order, an emergent order.
Exactly. And with
Complexity.
that, I'll be back. Sorry.
Agreed. No apologies necessary.
Place an order for food.
Burbs, yep, for sure. This is going to be probably a 10-minute break. Yeah, the difference between charlatanism and lack.
The difference to the charlatanism and lack of charlatanism generally revolves around where, in the fun house of the model, we find
Right.
the artifact. So, the trinket or the artifact.
That helps. That helps, by the way.
So here's the center. Here's
So,
the outside.
right.
And
then
this is what
yes,
I'm talking about.
But the artifact and the trinket.
So we have a middle, we have an outside. This is the hand. This is what the hand gestures are for. This hand is middle. This hand is outside.
Good.
But like, yeah, just picture like a fun house. Mirrors reflecting mirrors, reflecting mirrors, reflecting mirrors, reflecting mirrors. And
yes, and the question
so the
comes...
center is obviously reflecting its outer
Where-
shell and so on and so forth.
It's not even a center from this perspective.
It's the
It's
easiest.
just another mirror.
It's just a way to visualize.
Because the
it.
layer the layer itself can never know that this is the actual center. It never.
No,
it's
right,
just
like-
another mirror.
The center in this analogy would be a reflection of yet another reflection of yet another reflection, sure. But it being going into a center is the concept of it having a self-ish reference, if you will. The thing in the center is the self that is being referenced, which is nebulous because it changes from moment to moment. But
Fine.
that's kind of like the concept there. The point being is that if you look at the Quine relay and how it operates, you will see what the self-reference really is reflecting, and that is that the fact that the output of each step is input to the next step, and it's the same output over and over and over and over and over again in different languages, saying the same thing over and over and over in different ways, pointing right back at each other to say the exact same thing again in a loop, and then on top of that, there's the
This is a weird way to.
there's this poly what do you call it? No.
Okay.
The multilingual. There's like a polyglot.
Polyglot.
A polyglot Quine. Each Quine is a polyglot.
So you're giving an expose of this Hall of Mirrors as if it happens in sequence, like the Polycoin relay program. Yet we're talking also about things that kind of emerge.
It has
boom.
it does have a sequence to it in terms of time. Like it takes time for electricity to travel, right? There is a time element to it, but there's also a timeless element to it in that when the whole network is up and running, right, it's already giving inputs into every other part already. It's already powered up
by its structure.
So it's already twisted up into itself to begin wewith.
So
we're never starting from. So there's never a starting point in which there is no signal. There's already elements being fed back into it with the polyglot connotations as well. Polyglot here means the movement of muscles, the movement of eyes, the perception of colors, the perception of touch.
Here's what
and all of that
what I'm kind of seeing here. Although we're using a model and a programming language to describe what's happening with this Polycoin relay, the way we experience it
Polyglottic Quine relay.
Polyglottic Quine relay. The way we experience the polyglottic Quine relay is immediate, imminent, that eternal.
In the moment, yeah. That
feeling.
That is the moment. That is qualia.
It doesn't just, we don't watch it. We don't watch it calculating, and it doesn't actually. It's not like a.
It's not presenting that information. No.
Not only that, but it's not a binary computing processor that has to actually load through all of these relays.
Right.
The relays are literally like neurons attached to all of them at once, going boom, boom.
I got a signal. I'm signaling.
It's
I got a signal. I'm signaling.
So we're using a model to describe it as if it's in a sequence.
But we got to understand that it's been bootstrapped into its sequence already. We're not getting an empty mechanism void of everything. We're getting an emergent mechanism that is already prefabricated to maintain whatever biology is in place.
Right.
And so, yeah, like, given the structure of the funhouse, as we call it as a whole, the polyglot coin really is that being the funhouse as a overarching term, which also allows us to expand on the idea with mirror neurons and such things, so we can have a polyglottic coin happening between people and between ideas and so forth.
Right. And what you mean by that, a polyglottic coin between people, is that we've all, as beings, gone through our own life to gain our own experience of what words mean, what symbols mean.
Right,
and
we keep reflecting them back into each other.
And then we all in the moment have had this experience leading up to this point in life where we understand things as the way they are, and then they're kind of merging in this. An analogical ability is the only thing keeping us together.
You can see the coin happening in real-time conversation, because I will say words, you will reflect an answer to me, and I will sort of reflect an answer back to you, and you will. All of those reflections are the taking in of the words that are being said, repurposing them for another image, and again and again and again, and us being two different instances of it, we will always constantly modify and continue emerge the final narrative, that the hyper narrative. This is where the hyper narrative actually starts to become more clear. Although there are mental hyper narratives, would be this conversation, because I can't read your mind, you can't read my mind.
Right.
So what we have to do is splice meaning into itself and emerge something else reflective of both of us at the same time in the moment, right? Like the conversation itself is out there, if you will, and it comes back to me, comes back to you,
right?
And we're always reprocessing it again and again and again, and it's. Even though the words keep changing, the meaning stays the same, and you see how I'm building up on the words that I've just said, and you will do the same, and so on.
Ideally, the problem, I guess, is that there are different qualities to this type of interaction, and of course, yes, always,
that's coherence.
Any two beings come together and communicating on a medium, you have your own models of how things work, and then you're sort of having a group model of the two combined in that moment of, okay, this is our understanding right now, right? This is what's happening. And that can be very, let's say, categorical and crystallized, as we say, with the APS, or it can be a learning experience.
Well, this is where sadism,
That's
masochism.
what I mean by
this
equality.
is where sadism and masochism actually make a lot of sense to use for interpretive purposes, because in these interactions, like you're saying, you have this baseline where ideally you throw shit into the ether, I throw shit into the ether, and what you get back from the ether and what I get back from the ether start to jive and harmonize and all of that stuff.
Right.
So this is the
building
baseline.
Bridges.
But then there's on top of that, there's the ideas of how to harmonize, and this is where solipsism and masochism fuck up everything. In particular, the sadistic portion of it will say, okay, we're not lined up, therefore
my model is
will
correct.
crush your.
I am correct.
Yeah,
correct,
I will crush your interpretations and install my interpretations, and therefore we can resonate further.
And the opposite.
The opposite being is like, okay, daddy.
The masochist.
It's like, you tell it how it is, right? And just like
Right.
just being the opposite side of that,
Right.
and being the doormat that on the receiving end of it.
Meanwhile, two, let's say, completely valid beings are not harmonizing. There's simply one over top of another based on arbitrary fiat, which is disconnected in this breakaway civilization schema anyways.
This is where you get the revolution. This is where you get the outright rejection, but again, without any fallback, the rejection of the thing only leads to recreation of it.
What do you mean revolution? As the highest potential in that
Say you are
the saddest.
say you are oppressed by whatever hierarchy of the day is.
I was talking about an argument between two people and one overcoming the other and just saying, my way is right.
Well, both of these would be under the masochist. They're both trying to make each other, the other, the sadist. Sorry, I keep mixing these up. I don't know why.
Yeah.
But both of these would be sadistic in nature. Both will attempt to simply submit the other to themselves, and there will not be an actual coherence.
Okay. But so what I wanted to bring up is that's the revolution type thing where the sadist overcomes the other stack, and the other stack is built in its image.
Okay, so this is where you get.
And you can put that on top. See the writing?
Sorry,
writing there. It's in that area.
So this is where this diagram starts to come into play. This is on the elite level of ego,
and we'll pull this up in a
where
sec.
where you feel like you can just go off and trod on your own, apart from whoever is quote unquote controlling you. So you have about the same measure of power to exert on anybody below you.
Mm-hmm.
You're not afraid to fall down into the pit, if you will. You're not at the bottom. You're not oppressed by physical circumstances. You're oppressed by ideological ones. If you're on that level, you can create the revolution in which you are the stand-in elite, and have cannon fodder to throw at the others, at the system you've separated from, to fight it off. So this is what we see in general conflicts. Countries going to war, peace treaties being broken, all of the shit that's on paper basically, and is worth as much as toilet paper in real life. Anything with signatures upon it, basically, that reforms
like an
the system.
arbitrary way of saying, I'm above you, my stack is better than yours. My stack is different than yours. That's the separation.
Different is one. That the fact that it's exactly the same is lost. Because its operational schema is exactly the same.
Mm-hmm. The breakaway civilization.
Yeah, and so the war, the cannon fodder and whatever, isn't actually being done by the people doing the separation. They're done by people under them to duke it out internally.
Not by the callous.
Yeah, and you will see in this diagram here, right here, is that there's another revolution that is correspondent to this revolution. This is this ego. This ego.
Wait, we're still not at this one. Here we are. Nope.
Yeah, so we see two kinds of revolutions, and this is not an accident. On the first hand, we have the top one is like an ideological revolution where people can afford to simply talk differently because they have the underlying support that protects them from the consequences of the conversation. At the bottom, what we're seeing
because they're standing on top of egos.
Yeah, so this is the callous portion of hostility.
You just don't care and can't care because you're so rich that it doesn't matter.
Yeah, like you have the power to simply navigate your thought process as you wish.
Right.
Hello?
Beardbacks.
All right. So
He's back.
now that we've established the image of the Quine relay as a fun house and whatnot, and again, remember my hand motions, center, peripheral kind of thing.
By center, the special mirror we were talking about.
No, the
Self-referential?
No. The actual mechanism by which the Quine operates.
Okay.
The peripheral would be all of the polyglottic elements.
But the actual mechanism, this begs the question of that mirror.
Hold on.
Of the self-reference.
So, and we've presented the situation where there's a necessity to introduce an artifact that points back to the mechanism in the polyglottic sphere of things to reflect the house of mirrors that is reflecting back out again.
Mm-hmm.
So we've kind of established that there's this looping back interaction that is quote unquote required for actual progress, if you will, right? And what is stifled by the system to begin with. So with this picture in mind, we can make the case that without the artifact reflecting back, you kind of get a counter artifact. Not artifact.
The trinket.
No. The negative space for which the trinket or the artifact can easily plug into.
Without that being there.
Right.
It's sort of demanded from layers below. It must emerge.
Right, because these guys are never
The
reflected.
layers. Right.
This cycle of reasoning never captures it. This is the neglect that we've been discussing. This is what the formulation of the soul. Finds itself in,
and collectively the zeitgeist.
and as a collective quality of across all stacks, it becomes what we call the zeitgeist, the negative space into which to plug into the artifact or the trinket. The trinket being the recuperated element by the charlatan to perpetuate the system that caused this in the first place, whereas the artifact would actually complete the system, if you will, and sort of allow
German ideology
and allow it to disconnect.
German idealism. We're completing the system of German idealism.
Right.
With the correct artifact.
That's what we're saying. Asshole.
Classic, and who doesn't
that's
want to
not
do
gonna
that?
get us negative
Who
points.
doesn't want to do that?
German sensibilities. I've heard that term before.
Yeah.
German sensibilities.
That's bad. Oh, that's bad.
Yeah.
So yeah. Anyways,
it's all part of the same shit.
we just ordered lunch. Of course, we are halfway through. We're over halfway. 2.5 hours into the live stream. That was inappropriate. I muted you.
We're good.
Oh, holy burrito, the sacrament of our people. Now we take the bite.
We've actually touched on interesting notes about sacrifice.
Be nourished.
And sacrifice. Sacrifice is an interesting word because of it. Triggering elements. Everybody's triggered by sacrifice because why the fuck should I sacrifice anything?
Mm-hmm.
But second to it, it's usually a meaningless gesture. What the fuck is a sacrifice? If not
Superstitious.
If not to materialize something
Unrelated.
unrelated to what is given.
Unrelated.
It's a matter of trading with the gods, right? When and what did we say about trade? Is that it belongs to is a relationship between enemies.
Enemies. Yep. Sacrifice. Yep. Right. And so we were talking about and we're probably gonna we're into chill mode here for like 20 minutes, so don't even Don't stress us or nothing like that. Right, but we were talking about this idea of that, okay, a lot of people understand that something desperately needs to change. That's the zeitgeist they're feeling. In various
It's the
ways.
soul they're feeling, but the zeitgeist is the knowledge that it's universal.
Right, okay, yeah. Right, the soul on the personal level. So feeling that, and what is the response? What is the proper response?
Well,
where do we find
we
it?
get
Where
to
do we see it? How do we recognize
Before we get to correct, we have to explain what the response is. What is a possible response to the zeitgeist?
it? Right.
Because
And so we were talking about the dark night of the soul, and what people often do is throw away their entire
connection,
livelihood, their ability to live, just because it all seems so arbitrary, right? And then
having nothing to fall back on
then
that actually is substantial.
you get super punished
As
for
a-
nothing, and you were at a base of more power, and you moved down just to feel that extra punishment, I guess. Well, as an act of rebellion,
It feels righteous.
right? This is very common for the dark night of the soul. What does it call it?
Yep. But here's the thing: it's like how is this not simply a virtue signaling to yourself?
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, cool, you've realized the problem, you have taken the step to quote unquote solve it, but without reference to the greater context as to where it's happening. You did it for yourself.
I.e., a virtue signal, which is disconnected from any meaningful act. That's what's implied by virtue signal.
The worst part is that you only virtue signal to yourself. So not only did you just virtue signal as a platitude, the signal went nowhere.
Right.
This is how it all gets you in a sense, because it's like at that point it's nothing but punishment. You get nothing for your effort, and you definitely get less for any action you've done.
Right. And it's almost like you're doing it to prove it, not only to yourself, but to others around you. Like, look how...
Righteous.
No.
Oh.
Yes, being righteous, but look how fucked this system is. That I can... I feel bad right now. Some things happen, and I am not being taken care of. But watch how badly I'm not being taken care of, because as soon as I let go, the fucking system crushes me. Can you not see this, my people around me? See what happens to me, and you become like a martyr.
But then you're just another cog in the wheel again. Another story of failure that did nothing.
Right. And you
Right,
know
but
it's going to happen. You know it's going to happen deep down inside. And yeah, this is a tough part, and we kind of point to
because the system does not operate on the same principles.
Okay, we brought up this has been a cornerstone, I guess, of Portal Mountain theology, if you will, but the areas of concern in which gives you or shows you something to focus on, and it immediately comes back to self. So the question of should I quit my job, for example, does this sustain the self? Is this good for my organs, my cells, my bodies, who I am? Is it good to do this decision or that? You start focusing back on the self-reference, that special mirror in the house of mirrors, and you say, is it good or is it bad? Obviously, quitting your job, you are throwing yourself into the flame of the ego stack at the bottom.
This is that artifact having enough content in it to reflect back of what that the self is to begin with. Without that reflection back, how are you going to be able to say yes or no to any of the questions?
So the charlatan's trinket can incidentally point to that, but most often will not give any exploration.
It'll give you the yes or no questions without the exploration inside. It'll give you the pre-made, prefabricated answers.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it will boil down to, in that it removes context. And this is the modus operandi of the system. It removes
Right.
the context, and therefore gives you a yes or no, regardless of what the context is. And so, does it work for you? Not necessarily. It could potentially, just by, meshing with conditions. But, and like, this is one of the ways that the system's really hides itself, is by creating a set of conditions that prolong any kind of perceived punishment, where it sets itself up to constantly reward you for, regardless of whatever you do, the participation trope, if you will. Why people hate it so much?
The death circle again. We're talking about,
Just rewarded for repeating the same fucking thing,
right, which
despite
leads
it
to
being-
destruction. Despite it leading to destruction, yes, we're rewarded. The tunnel reality, the dopamine cycles.
Yeah,
Pushes.
your immediate bodies, for example, is given its drugs, it's given whatever, but the fact that it's falling apart piece by piece is being we'll solve that later. The doctors will get to it later.
Right. And so this is the weird thing, is meanwhile no solution has any possibility of being correct, essentially, when played out, aside from the solution that through the artifact, as we call it, gains that the mirror of self-reference in the Hall of Mirrors, which gives you an access to the body and connects the body and the mind. This is what has been disconnected through schooling and to support the project of the breakaway civilization.
Well, schooling, on the surface, one of the very first thing it does is it causes you to have a complete distrust of all your bodily
your
reactions.
own senses. Right.
And only toe the line of the formal
What
information.
externalities are expected. What you should present, what you should respond.
And the reward and punishment system just makes it that much easier to accomplish, simply because
Correct.
pull on this lever, you reward.
One sec. Prefer.
We don't need to hide.
No. It's
It's
not,
illegal.
It's not about that. It's
It's all legal.
of course, coughing in the background and all that. But
We're about to cough in the background.
We're gonna do some coughing.
I mean,
It'll
just
be productive.
just let it be.
Goodbye. Goodbye, image. Temporarily. Be right back. But of course, we are still here with you.
Just toking the pipe.
Yep. It's I like the idea of smoking not near the beginning.
Yeah.
But because
Towards the end, actually.
it really, not to toot its horn or anything, but can shift consciousness or perspective and all that, and also can throw you into mental chaos sometimes and forgetfulness and all this. So it's best, I think, to get
too used to it.
Like, we've got some. Yeah, I know you. I wouldn't. No, not you, but me. But for sure, a lot of people too. So it's great that we get our thesis statement kind of out in the front there, and then just relax on that and get some.
Well, after we do this,
extra perspective.
After we do this, we're going to dive into the actual Dark Knight.
Are you ready, man?
The actual Dark Knight. Why it's a Dark Knight. We've already kind of explained it, but we're going to just reiterate.
Okay.
The process. And after we do that, I'd like to dive into
what to do
for it to not be the consequence of this exploration. Because right now, the Dark Night of the Soul is actually a consequence, a potential consequence for this exploration.
Yes.
So, with that in mind, what the precautions are, and why those are the precautions, really.
Right, and we've gone into Portal Mountain ethics before, I think, which is great. But this sounds like that too. Like, don't don't try
You're
this
a
at
guest.
home, so to speak.
Yeah,
guides help majorly.
Mhm.
None of us know, even the guides know what we're doing exactly. It's up to you to kind of clue in and key into what we're talking about, etc., etc. And like,
yeah,
the
we're not
ethics
under
of
the
it.
pretense that we have been able to resolve the
Right.
these elements.
None of
for
us are in a
ourselves.
resolved state.
we,
for sure.
we have what I would call temporary breaks.
And this
because
is
of this,
this is also
system.
called a privilege,
Yes.
which we are privileged.
We have the time to engage with.
Being in a, let's say, Western culture of middle-ish class, whatever.
I'm climbing.
Of not dying immediately. So like, this presents a problem, obviously, of that we are also, our body itself isn't demanding to be helped, or it
No.
isn't demanding anything. Our body, we, through mental projection, we have to project our body out to the world, so to speak, through that empathetic sort of projection.
I've moved my body from the immediate necessities lately. I'll just qualify it, and then being able to essentially maintain everything based on
Right.
just presentation.
Yeah. So I think what you're talking about is
just,
like,
and it is such a bizarre position to be in, while recognizing that's what I'm doing.
you're talking about probably like the paycheck to paycheck type scenario.
Yeah, which
Of
I'm
which
away from.
That's where I'm kind of in. I'm at the slightly, if you budget correctly, then you can sort of break away from that.
Yeah.
But it's like a trap that just, you never actually
It's-
seem to break away from it.
And this is statistically also proven. It ain't
Like, I need some
don't-
new shoes, you know?
Nobody get you don't you don't get out of the situation until your
That's
pay
tough, man.
until your pay bracket changes.
That's like that month is gone. Like, you can't save anymore
Yep.
just because you did something.
No,
you-
it's more
you
expensive
needed
to be
do.
poor for sure, and
Oh God, yeah.
my like this is my humble brag, if you will. I for the first time, I'm 38. For the first time in my life, I've been able to take a vacation. And
Oh,
my
damn.
God, is it a ever different feeling from, just being jobless for a few months and
Right.
having nothing to just sit back, still get paid for everything you do, like literally, just
To have a vacation.
to have a vacation and nothing around you actually changes. Like, I didn't have to worry about my income or anything. I just didn't have to do anything for a while. And one of the things that that people, my manager, noticed is that I totally unplugged. Like, I touched fucking nothing, to the point where I didn't realize somebody had left the company. You
Yeah.
know, like in the process. So I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
I didn't. They left. I didn't realize that. I was like, man, he really unplugged.
Yeah.
And
for
I mean,
real.
I even checked the messages and everything,
It's
but I still
healthy.
didn't catch it. And it was.
That's healthy.
I've never been more relaxed.
This is where the breakaway civilization emergence bubbles out and should come back down, but it never does. It always remains in the stasis. And I felt
If
that
I had-
even with Portal Mountain work, because over this holiday, I didn't even do that.
If I had been,
I resolved to, but I didn't even touch it. There's 2 videos behind that don't even have a title that we live streamed.
No, I did exactly the same thing. I didn't touch anything.
It must be healthy. It must be natural somehow.
It's
right?
our anxieties playing out, and my anxiety definitely showed me that I don't want to be as engaged with tech as I am, even though I am all the time. Like, if it was up to me, I'd not be technologically inclined,
How could you do that as a programmer?
right?
Too bad. Too bad.
Like, but
That's your
it's significant.
job.
It is significant a realization to me personally.
Yeah, preference would be not to be shoved into this giant stack.
I love programming to begin with. I love the challenge,
Sure.
the problem
yeah.
solving,
Yeah.
the conceptual
Yeah.
problems.
Hmm.
But when it comes down to it,
Me too. My experiences.
when it comes down to it, if I would I be inclined to constantly solve these problems or just live?
Like when it seems so arbitrary.
Well, the ultimate answer is
When-
that I just don't give a fuck.
When you're solving problems that don't problems that don't connect back to this special mirror, this self-reference
It's just
in
another
the funhouse.
It's just another trinket to put out.
Right. But isn't the artifact like, say, your programming work on the dashboard itself? Right? Is that not somehow more satisfying?
That's a challenge, actually, because here we have a situation of low potential energy, aka me, and a powerful system, which I'm climbing to equalize the playing field.
As your internal modeling
So that
your
means
abilities correct. Yep.
yeah. So that means I have to overcome a lot of the built-in systems to facilitate the things that are not done yet. One of these things is an actual direct opposition to the way we conceive of the social platform
Social
that we
media.
need.
Right.
And the point of tension is exclusivity versus inclusivity. So, to materialize our dashboard, I have to wade through authentication. I have to wade through authorization.
Of course.
All of the different things that allow our system to look like the other systems
Yeah.
and play the same game.
Because it
On
is
the outside.
it is largely the same game. There's
But
just very special things like you can't,
But to turn it inwardly is very different.
as an administrator.
And so it's the first part that I'm really mentally stuck on, because I have to actually repeat the system to a large degree.
Yeah.
And it's so fucking frustrating.
But it's what you would expect, because we are in the social. We are making expressions. We are making concrete, discrete expressions. Our expressions are discrete.
But I'm
Right.
but I'm also one
You have
person.
to. We have to interface with that.
I'm also one person. I
Understood.
I have a nuclear household,
Right.
which means another
Hey, it's
facade.
great that we got this, bi-weekly thing going on, buddy.
Yeah, man.
Like, that's a thing in itself, and which I would challenge anybody listening to this.
Sorry.
If you've managed to get this far and are listening through a bunch of coughs, to imagine what type of organization or type of endeavor, let's call it, that we're doing something together lasts more than a year. We're over a year now.
Yeah.
Every 2 weeks, live streaming for 3 to 4 hours.
And this is maybe just me personally, but this is the zeitgeist that I have right now about it, is that there's no, I don't see breaks being applied to it in any sense. That what is
yeah.
emerging out of it is
If only
continuous and
accelerating.
flowing.
If only, if anything, accelerating. As
Because even the
we've talked
YouTube-
about today, creating
Even this
a-
year is itself a catalyst of the previous conversations.
What
that
are
have
we
been had
creating?
before?
An outline for a book, right? This is kind of just the idea.
This is the next phase. Yeah, we're not doing that today, but between today and next
right. So
meeting,
we're changing up our dev meeting kind of format, if you
become
will.
become the book development meeting,
to
yeah.
become more. What do you call it?
condensed, solidified, and concrete.
Directed. Yep. intentional.
Yeah.
So intentionality.
So to take everything we've been spewing out, like just letting flow, recycle it into an outline.
Right. So
and
this
give it a structure.
in other words, this is another layer of discipline onto our existing live streaming structure, which we just keep doing.
Yep.
A layer of discipline onto that is between these meetings, of which so far,
Excuse me.
we have 2 weeks between. We discuss and all that, but the commitment here is to work on an outline, and at least, especially so next meeting, we're going to have an outline and we're going to discuss it.
Well, this is just a continuation of the same concept we've just been describing. What we are effectively saying is that there's worth in facilitating an artifact.
There's tons of worth. People intuit this.
Yeah,
Correct.
But just due to the structure, the proposed structure of the polyglottic coin relay, there's merit in facilitating an extrinsic artifact when such a coin is gone into its death cycle,
which points at that self-reference special mirror
that allows it to find the little ant by ant find their path back
to
the
back
colony.
to the actual colony, not what they think is the colony,
because they've been following the ass of the person in front of them, which is what it amounts to,
without questioning why. But the ants can't, but humans can.
Right, the ants can't tell they're running in a circle because they don't see themselves from above. We have the cognitive, quote-unquote, technology to be able to make that leap.
Dude, like 50% or more of everybody in North America is basically paycheck to paycheck with some type of minuscule savings, if anything.
Which is like one medical emergency away from being depleted.
And is this the way it always was? No, it's generation to generation. It keeps like contracting, like one step forward, 2 steps back, if you will.
Well, yeah.
As to where life would be.
Often modern civilization is compared to the Middle Ages, right? The Dark Ages and stuff like that. What the discussion ultimately fails to point out is that when shit went down, like say you were attacked or sacked or whatever, shit was bad. It was terrible. People were brutal. People were very systemic in their extermination of other people.
Rape and pillage.
But because they were so spread out, the events actually did not happen all that often to most people.
That's interesting.
And so, when the Dark Ages came about, power was loose, meaning less people were controlled, meaning more people were allowed to live out their lives without coercion.
So this
so there's a different story to the Dark Ages, in which is actually saying that the lower classes of civilization at that point in time
gained some amount of freedom.
Were actually, they had more autonomy over themselves and were able to live better.
So wouldn't the system be so upset about this and say, this was the worst time in history?
And I just like to
the
point out...
system would say that.
The system would say that, and here's how it does it. It would be like, well, you had bandits roaming around doing whatever the fuck because there's lawlessness and whatever.
Yeah, right.
This categorically misses the point.
Meanwhile,
that a unified community will stick together to defend itself against any perpetrator.
And meanwhile,
so those forces weren't big enough.
quote unquote, big bandit wasn't allowed to control vast swaths.
Which would amount to an empire.
Rape and pillage on the whole bigger scale than...
Right. We only find those rapers and pillagers after the fact of consolidation of everybody back into the system, not when the system falls apart.
That Dark Age description, isn't that more close to how people would communalize together for security?
No.
To understand that which is outside.
No.
An inside and an
worse.
outside.
It's so fucking... It's stupendously worse. That Dark Age description serves only one purpose. It serves to solidify history in the same eyes of the elite, who saw it as a dark period because they
didn't have control.
They lost their control and therefore called it the dark period because they had none of it.
But they were still like large, by and large, separate entity just off the side of power, still retaining land and power, but not in control.
Right,
of
but they were struggling at that time because
so they were
nobody
so
gave
upset, and this is their mythology that they
because
presented.
nobody gave a fuck about what they wanted, and
Right.
nobody gave them the fucking
And so
room
we're
that they
asked
to
to
take over.
empathize with the fact that the Dark
The
Ages
elite.
were bad, because wasn't it that Christianity and religion just tore everything apart and
Well,
all
right,
went
you
in?
got the Vatican retreating onto itself.
So is this the first major victory of Christianity?
No, there was a few Dark Ages. Oh, sorry.
In
What was the
which
question?
case, I mean, by victory of Christianity, I mean like the ability to just implant that chaos, uncontrollable chaos, the idea of sovereignty based on the Lord God is your major commander, not any person with a badge that says I'm this rank.
You
I'm
have that.
rank.
You have that with the Roman Empire. You have that with the Chinese. You have that with the Mongolians.
But you have a lot of
that-
participant apprehension of that. You don't have that itself in a membership sense, largely. That's a distinction we're trying to make, right?
It starts with the group.
I don't know history itself, but what I'm saying about coherence and all that, this is a distinction that's major.
In recorded history, recorded history, you can find this cycle happening in Greece. When the Greek, the Greek had a period of going from city-states, warring city-states,
So
to
the
a
kind of people took over?
to a consolidated sort of empire, not quite
Okay.
as
Yeah, I see.
as whole as say Rome would be after the fact, but it did
Right.
under Alexander, whose entire vision was that people are not necessarily different, which was like
And you're showing, I think, a fractal reflection of what happens on the local and community scale,
yeah.
yet wider in a
So
nationalistic sense.
Greece is one
Regarding
of
this
those.
chaotic pendulum of Christianity and religion and all that,
In our recorded history, Greece
and freedom.
is the one is the pinnacle of where this is the first dark age, because Greece became like this ancient pinnacle of civilization, and then it fell apart. It disintegrated into its components, because the landscape is actually very unforbidding in Greece. It's, if you know anything about it, it's
Well, that's
not
tough.
it's not exactly travel friendly. When you stay in your place, it's fine, but when you start
Mountainous.
when you start to project yourself, it's not exactly easy. Given their technology at the time, it was definitely
Yeah, so what you're saying is it was influenced by various other factors,
Yeah.
geographical including,
Yeah.
as to what happened there.
and so essentially the entire stronghold of central power started to collapse, as it always does, and Greece went through what it called the Dark Ages. The funny thing is
Right.
that its populace, specifically the general populace, the poor populace, experience relief.
Right.
And so you have again the same narrative that
So-
that history paints
Isn't
the
this
situation
kind of like a
as
happy
dark
narrative?
age. It's,
Isn't
it-
this actually kind of happy for, if
it's
you're
happy-
wondering,
it's
are
happy
you
if
going to
you
be
notice it. It's
will you be
sad if you-
rewarded or punished for addressing the zeitgeist that you feel in your soul?
punished every time by
in,
the system.
in light of this narrative of
In light-
Dark Age collapse,
But-
will you
but
be
say-
rewarded or punished?
Okay, but even narrative in and of itself is not contextless. If you give this narrative in the wrong context, it just makes you paint
I
you
know,
the
I know.
enemy.
I'm
again.
not trying to push a certain ideology of just do this and that'll fix or anything like that. But the story of being told is that people suddenly
Well,
weren't oppressed by these fiat
so
laws over top.
self-referentially speaking, which is what model does, this narrative illuminates the fact that
Here's an interesting one.
to continue along this line, you can only expect one result, and it's a counterintuitive one. You get a dark age in which the general population feels relief, and the elite feels pressure, and then you get the enlightened age following it, in which the population that felt relief in the first place is recuperated under false pretenses of the said relief in terms of progress. And then the cycle can begin again, in which everybody's
dark and light, dark and lighten. That's interesting. That the two ends of the cycle of who's feeling pressure and relief, elite or the masses.
Only the elite feel the cycles because they have access to the systemic channels through which to
what do you mean? But in dark ages, we were just talking about the general public.
They lose control over the populace, but not their small little regimes.
Okay, and then you have this lawlessness case scenario where it can be argued, oh, actually the elite is right, quote unquote.
They have the order
because we have order.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. And
so this is the pendulum swinging.
But so slowly everybody's getting recuperated back into the fold.
Classic, man. You've got this pendulum swinging from both sides.
You get the and this is actually captured by the Greek in the book The Republic.
And everybody at each end they scream.
Plato's Republic describes
absurd.
Civilization.
Everybody screams the word absurd at each end of the pendulum because it's so extreme and retarded. Let's say in a technical sense.
Well, also, there's no stoppers here. There's no brakes. There's no brakes.
No brakes. No recognition of the duality / non-duality happening here.
And so this causes a very strange situation if we were to just use this diagram as a metaphor. Don't take it too literally, please, people.
We can't. It's my scribbles, really.
Yeah, you can't take it too literally, but we have a pendulum swinging both sides in an extreme. We get the absurd situation that the artifact that's required has to push, literally, either one way or the other, even past the points of these extremes, to find some kind of metastability, not at the bottom, but this is the only spot where it could slow down just enough.
Are you talking about the artifact?
Yes.
And escape, if you will.
And the narrow path and whatnot.
Escaping the death circle, right.
Yes. This pendulum metaphor points to the fact that you can't, because there's no brakes at the bottom, you can either force a pendulum for a person to go to the one extreme in terms of, say, egalitarianism or, say, fundamentalism, so far beyond anything that's recognizable within existing systems at all, to break away from it all the way through to the top, where there's enough, or say enough lack of a momentum to keep going past that center point.
Is this, again, self-reference thing where everything kind of takes on this quality of it is what it is. In the moment, I keep taking in reality and constructing it, and it is what it is. And you stop swinging and swinging from absurd to absurd, this idea through, the elite and the general public, through dark ages and enlightenments, to who feels the pressure. The dark ages is where the elite who seem to be so enlightened have lost control, and the population has gained some semblance of freedom.
Of life, yeah.
Right. And this one has the slavery, and this one maybe is the freedom is here, and this is the slavery.
Well, yeah. And so part of this has been recognized already. Plato's Republic talks about the cycles of the Republic, essentially, going from being ruled by the fat elites, to being rebelled against and led by the people, to being led by the rich, to to being led by the after revolutions, the military usually takes over. Past the military, if the populace is strong enough, it's dissolved into the populace, and so you get like your democracy, and then it cycles into
like any country's ready. Any country's ready for the military to take over.
So then you get into aristocratic systems because the rich tend to collect voting power, and then you start to get into totalitarianism again, which disintegrates again into a revolution. Military takes over, and the cycle continues. And this is what we're kind of describing here with the pendulum, in that it's swinging one way or the other.
Wow.
Like a four-stroke engine.
We haven't explored totalitarianism too much, and this cycle is like...
Well, this is just what Plato was saying. I have never really delved into this, but this is how
sounded interesting.
This is how he described it. I'm just kind of taking
totalitarianism at the end, and what was the 4-part cycle?
So you start with the military being in control because they just won a revolution.
Military, that's a bottom base.
We've separated out from the old system. We've revolutionized it. The military currently has power. Usually, if the population itself is
Interesting.
free
Okay,
enough,
this is dysmorphic. I see it.
If it's free enough, it will then the military will dissolve into citizenship. And citizenship allows for kind of
what I was talking about
democratic society.
There is ISO here in that the military is a force of a country that allows it to survive in case of higher ideals disintegrating. At a higher level, you have society disintegrating, and it comes down to a point where military is
and this is also captured in
the border.
This is also captured in the
law.
egosphere, in that the ego is recuperated back down at the war cycle. So long as there's ego and war, and it's all sustained, right? It just keeps flipping around into the next phase of the cycle. And so what we're seeing here is more like a disintegration of the central power into a decentralized authority, which is then changed into tokenized authority, right? Since there is no need for flinging hunks of metal at each other anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You start flinging a hunk of sound bites at each other, which amounts to the same fucking thing.
Right.
Just it sounds better to our ears.
Well, the commodification of life, the process of it, has advanced beyond such crude means as shooting bullets of lead into each other.
Has it?
Yeah.
Because we don't do that.
Well, no, I mean.
No,
It's
just been normalized and integrated into a grander and more obfuscated system.
Yeah, if you think
it's
about
more
it,
laundered now.
That's the end result of anything like having a police force as the last line of the thing that will put a bullet in something's head if need be by law.
Obfuscation is the cancer growth. It doesn't have a shape. It doesn't have a goal, trajectory. It is what causes nihilism. Mm-hmm. It is nihilistic. Right. However, the only thing it does is grow and grow, and it doesn't stop growing.
I wanted to point back to prehistory or whatever with tribal people who had experiences, especially in their adolescence, which caused them, say, trauma, which continues on in their life. And they have to have the rite of passage to adulthood, which allows them to let go of such trauma as being not essentially real to reality.
Most rites of passages would be considered traumatic by our standards, even by our model standards.
Of course. I don't think that disagrees with what I was saying.
No, I'm just trying to make sure that it sits correctly. It would be like...
much more traumatic.
I'm not saying it is.
Yes,
But it would be much more like
encounters
with
death.
It's a design
a
trauma.
design encounter with death, in which
Yeah.
there's a good chance you'll die, or you could die,
There
or whatever.
is, but the point is not
Yeah,
to kill you.
the point in that, in the typical thing to be sent away from the village, you are no longer part of this village.
Find
When
your way
you're ready
back.
for that, okay, now you must just stay away from us for this many nights.
Yeah, fine.
When you come back, you'll be celebrated.
It's more like we've taken you, we've transported you to this mythical situation, right? According to the myth. It's not according
Right.
to necessarily any scientific premise, right? There's a myth involved. In the myth,
and a tradition.
yeah, in the myth, there's the traditional hero's journey, which is the trek back home. And the ritual then coincides with that by taking somebody and forcefully displacing them into that situation so that they can act out that myth. This is not to say for right or for wrong. This can be lethal, and we're not condoning.
Of course, rite of passage.
We're not condoning a violent mechanism for fulfillment
Right.
of adulthood. That's
That
not.
kind
That's
of-
the point.
This kind of begs the question, though.
This is
what
just what
rite
we
of
find.
passage does Portal Mountain have?
Well, Portal Mountain rests atop of commodified world. Not, it doesn't sit on the natural world. It sits atop of the last plateau, which
Right.
envisions
Yeah, it's very
tunnel
technical
reality.
and all that shit.
So Portal
True
Mountain
story.
cannot reflect it so directly.
It has to speak this language.
Right. It cannot reflect the original human perception. It cannot engage it because it doesn't flourish anywhere.
Portal
really.
Mountain has to be able to speak the language of the highest layers of that which it's trying to model.
And then about the lower layers as content. So it will stay in the position of artifact for that reason. And this is why it's always been called an artifact and not and something to be sympathetic to rather than empathetic to, because the empathy is never derived from artifacts,
Right.
of which we call now trinkets to be kind of like the
Right,
commodities.
So this is kind of an
that are in
acknowledgement of the
place.
fact that anything that can be told to you, or any factoid, or any amazing part of some sort of system,
Feel good stuff, the
Yeah.
dopamine hit.
it's very different.
Well, it's different in its goal. It's not different in its follies. Like, it's still verbalized. It's still symbolized. It's still representational, and so it can never
Right.
it can never be
And-
claimed to be
And
immune
again, the question,
to interpretation
the
of
question,
problems.
different how, and this question is about the
Charlatan.
self-reflective mirror
Yeah.
as well, right? Like,
So there's a self-reflective mirror angle. Does the artifact is the artifact
right, like
presented?
what is the actual difference between the two?
Is the artifact point back to the self-referential model that only can ever express things in terms of itself? That's the harder test, actually. But the easier test is, does this artifact create a hierarchy of authority? And if it does, there's a problem.
Right.
Because the model insists on the strange loop, and in the strange loop there is no authority, makes no sense aside from the fact of fiat. But fiat is not in itself authoritative. It is simply the way things move themselves
Right.
on a higher layer through a lower
Right.
layer.
As we would expect, complex adaptive systems being described through models, utilizing as the simplest way of describing what it is.
Yeah.
Just keep it simple.
Well, this is a personal gripe of mine, of why I don't necessarily appreciate
slogan,
the mind,
keep it simple, stupid.
that mindset.
Because
Yes,
it's
there's
a typical
value.
recuperation.
There's value in being as simple as necessary. There's value
Of
in
course.
that.
To the most, canceling out noise.
Right. But then that value becomes negative when you overdo that. And it becomes susceptible to a secondary agenda
And
and a tertiary and
by
so
agenda,
forth.
I think
Injection of other
I think you
fiats.
mean keep it simple is reflecting is pointing at the model itself, whereas people interpret this as meaning keep it simple to my life, that my narrative can be simple and I don't need to worry too much about this.
Yeah, so like
Which are two completely different things.
the point of simplicity is
and beauty and simplicity.
is to remove the unnecessary. But the removing of the necessary is not the same thing. I guess would be the counter way of saying it.
Fascinating. Anyways, I'm gonna call a break. This time, what are we at? Got about half an hour left. 2 hour a day. At least to this stream, right? So we can probably keep going, but as usual, so we're at 3 hours 20 minutes, and we don't let you go past 4 because YouTube gets angry and my transcription service says chunk up the video and all this dumb stuff. Right, so
Thanks, system.
4 hour mark, which I think it's a good constraint, right? Being constrained is great.
No, it's fine.
And-
This is just more of a jab than anything.
And in which
I just don't have any respect for YouTube.
Yeah, after what we went through today,
Or just in general, but also.
we went
Copyright
to
infringer.
copyright school. We literally couldn't live stream until we
Didn't I answer
watched
most
a
of the
video.
questions? I was like, no, just do this. No, just do this.
Well, that's what we try to do immediately. Like, okay, start the video, but let's start answering the questions. At least they let you do that.
Oh, fuck, man. They were so fucking blatantly stupid.
4 questions. 3 out of 4 were completely retarded. And, like, it just meant to, like, teach you a lesson, right? That's an interesting thing.
Slap
Okay.
on the wrist, buddy.
Because, hey, I got
Here's 2 of them.
I got 5,000 views out of it, so I feel much better than those slaps. 5,000 and like
He's like,
100.
just
like,
bring the slaps on,
100
bitch.
100 people liked it. So 2? Is that all you got? Give me 90 more.
Whack!
Let's fight.
No. You just sit there.
And then
You
we'll
sit there like a good man.
and then we'll wrestle.
Right. Real wrestling. So yeah, so is there
gonna
anything to
take a
let's
break,
say
right
before
away.
the break?
No. Maybe. I don't know.
Well, I think the major point we need to bring back to is to what to do with the Dark Night of the Soul, because we have made such a big point of it, and I don't think we went into what the alternative is.
Right?
The alternative is a lot of fucking work. It's not gonna be. It's also gonna feel painful. I'm just giving that as a caveat.
All right.
However, it is the kind of this is where the concept of sacrifice comes into play a little bit. It's where you sacrifice a little bit of pain right now, so that there is no pain later at the end.
Yeah.
So there's a kind of a method to the madness.
And like with a community like the Portal Mountain trial community, let's call it, like there's support and like
well, that serves as an example.
I guess peers that can like cheer you on.
It serves
through coherence,
It
right?
serves as a concrete example for that. It definitely is that one,
Right.
what you would call a safe
But
space,
like
I
just
guess, whatever.
being together
To start this exploration and talk about the problem.
well, it helps, and I think that's why anybody who feels isolated or alone in this should try maybe seek out other people who are like that and learn to speak this language of Portal Mountain, so that you can more quickly relate.
Or similar.
right?
We still have
Polyglottic coin.
we still have to say there's translations to
Surf
this.
the polyglottic coin.
We have our terms, but those terms are meant to be useful in other ways of expression.
Just actuate the polyglottic coin.
Yes. The important thing is the underlying.
I love that smirk. You're almost amused for a second.
I'm amused because what I'm seeing is not like what most people would imagine right away, and what I'm seeing is like the outer surface of those like songs, the recipes, and whatever, merging into each other as metaphors of each other due to the fact that they stem from the self-referential system. So for me, the polyglot, like I'm smirking because like it is that, and to see it in its totality, like
right, the membership.
this would be my quote unquote emotional appeal to people. Is like, yeah, this is the cool thing to see here. This is where your dopamine hit would come from, if you will, in the rewarding part. But like to get there, I don't just based on experience,
and which in itself causes problems potentially. Going after that tunneled reality of the Portal Mountain Tunnel or the Charlatan Tunnel, right? This is always something that could happen to you if you go into some philosophical or whatever cult-like community, which you feel as a cult.
Yeah, that's the essence.
And that's what we were talking about too. Like, how can the institute be like a cult, essentially, where we have these shared values, where everybody knows what the values are, and people call it a cult. Who gives a fuck? But this is a different type of cult, where we're proud of and we'll take you to Matt.
Well, see, and again, this is like this double-edged sword. That pride can be
right.
Like immediately recuperated.
So that would be
as a punishment.
Yes. So what I just said there was like a participant type of da 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 da.
Yeah.
But on
and this is where you get the adversary.
On the membership side, right? The adversary to that basic thing, the basic fighting.
Like, who the fuck
the
are
masses you? The masses encountering themselves, because most masses are not at membership level.
Like, who the fuck are you to say it's like this?
Yeah, that's a big challenge.
Well, that is the challenge. Well, yes.
And because you want to create an organization called the Institute, that's what we've called it.
That
right?
points back to a point we made in the car.
That this cannot be the goal.
We cannot.
The Institute is not the goal itself. The Guild is not the goal.
Yeah, we cannot.
The goal is
the adoption of the inner model, the self-reflective one, which allows the Guild to essentially materialize out of threshold.
We're talking two layers again. Complex adaptive systems layering again.
So even there, by explicit definition, there cannot be an authoritative structure built into it, because it has to emerge from that internal DNA-like way of putting together the path away from the cycle into the colony, back into the colony, back to the ground, to the natural dispositions, and relate them back through the same signals to the cycle, so that it itself can no longer be captured by that cycle.
So fundamentally
all
changed.
Of it is emergent by the individual ants going through the process, not
and a fundamentally changed model, which creates a whole new.
So the cycle, the authority of the cycle is broken not by creating another authoritative cycle, which would defeat the entire purpose.
Right. Exactly. And that's a weird, delicate thing, isn't it?
And we were talking about the charlatan for this reason, and in that the charlatan is a perpetuator of yet another cycle. By this they can be recognized, and by the authoritative structure.
That they're constantly hooking into ideological hooks, like
only
API hooks.
Only, without further reflection back down into the self-reflecting nature of where those hooks emerged from.
Right, and even a debate or a argument about that. Like, let's talk about it. right? As far as
which you already alluded to is a pain response, because you, from the perspective of the ego stack, you are severing the dashboard from that particular ego, and therefore you're severing all identification and self rhetoric and self anything.
And of course, talking about the dark night of the soul, this type of a process can be triggered.
So if you're
and
ripped,
take years
Yeah.
to process through, and to reconstruct these layers, complex adaptive system layers.
so if you're
The modeling of such, and the content of the layer models.
So the issue with the ego really is that it has a very narrow mechanisms under which it can
right.
pretend to be more than itself,
And it can only
The
ever try
dashboard.
to recuperate.
and then you go ahead and you sever that from them, and not only does that not resolve the isolation, right? It plunders it into further isolation to be able to only connect with the final response of pain, of being severed from everything. So the complete nihilism of existence, the worthlessness of life, whatever else, whatever other mythology comes alongside that. And of course, what I want to hammer at, having prolonged this for so many hours, is the fact that there needs to be a landing pad.
I'm glad we prolonged it for hours.
A landing pad.
I'm glad you brought this
fall
back
onto.
to this too. Right.
Because what this is the dark night of the soul, ripping it all away and having nothing, no ground to land onto after the fact.
What to replace it with?
Yeah.
The model.
You've been ripped away from
The
all
model,
social constructs.
And before
Now
we
what?
do that, we've got about half an hour to this point, and I got to take a leak, so I'm going to once again call it as the break. I will be the one to call break. Magically, genuine noms, and with that, Will Burbs. All right, so we're back, and I'm in a death cycle. What do I do?
You're in a death cycle. What do? You want to sever the connection of reward and punishment so that this is not the only driver you have. You have no fallback. What
to
do
be
you do?
rewarded or punished. That's not your.
Well, disconnection.
You decide that that's not your only motivator.
Yeah.
In the moment.
However, to act on this decision
That's a big one, isn't
is
it?
categorically painful and punishing because you're no longer towing the line. You will have social pressure from every direction.
I will not be driven by reward and punishment. That
And
is
so
my mantra.
And so everybody
I will not
tries
be
to
driven by reward and punishment.
and so immediately the
I will not be
response is
driven
to
by
punish
reward and
you.
punishment.
The immediate response is
I will
to
not be driven
find
by
the kind
reward
of-
and punishment.
Okay, I know what you're
I will
doing.
not be driven by reward and punishment.
Demonstration
All right, carry
accepted.
it.
Demonstration
I
accepted.
appreciate that you would continue to elaborate.
So the point is that, as you could see, the response is to find a punishment that will draw the individual back into the fold. Like, okay, you won't be susceptible to reward and punishment. I'll just throw you in jail. See how you like that.
Right.
That kind of stuff.
By force.
Like
Some
just to show you.
Some muscle is going to come and muscle you.
But the response is even like to just show you how wrong you are. Not the idea. Not even your actions. Your actions are not actually doing it. You're not doing anything. It's the fact that you put your foot down like that immediately
Breakaway civilization.
gives you that response of like,
Right.
I'm gonna watch you now.
Breakaway civilization.
And throw you for the smallest infraction, throw your ass in the fucking cage.
But why not try to analyze why they did that in the first place? Why did
Out of
that,
the question.
Why did that person do that?
That's what I'm saying. This is like the cycle reinforcing itself,
Right.
rather than
Asking, this body is sending signals. What do they mean?
Mhm.
I don't know. Because I'm a complex adaptive systemic layer speaking a certain grammatical capacity here, which doesn't know exactly how it's all constructed.
doesn't care.
Does not, well,
Care.
hopefully
Doesn't-
cares.
It does. No, it does not have the capacity to care because it doesn't know
The system
why it
itself.
needs to care about it.
The system itself
It doesn't
can't.
have
No. Because these like neurological nets, like, you think artificial intelligence could like fill some of that gap, like with legal and shit, and that's,
But then
I
we're
wonder.
looking again at the superficial layers.
Of course, it always
of the coin, and not the why these things emerge. So again, it can't
But
ever
I think
touch those.
AI is probably good for legal. I think
Sure, if you want to go the pure mechanical.
being responsive. I mean, at a low level, but also allowing emergence. AI, from what I see, just
It can't. What AI can't do is reflect.
ordering over layers.
It can't reflect human nature. It can reflect human concepts. So AI is stuck in the superficial layer entirely and can never process the artifact the same way because it doesn't have a zeitgeist. It doesn't have a missing bit.
of course, yeah.
Like there's nothing being vacated. Which is
There's
the
no
neglect
zeitgeist.
There's no neglect there.
You don't have a zeitgeist.
Well, if you want to really separate what makes a machine rather than any other archetype, it is that lack of conceptualization of self-reflection. It doesn't need it. It's just operational.
That's sort of like inherent built-in meaning, because any machine, of course, is certain very high layers jumped above any kind of biological expression which have happened over the last billions
But they're
of
entirely
years.
algorithmic. They're not meant. The algorithms are meshed together artificially in the sense that they didn't develop out of themselves, so
Well,
they have no concept of self-reflection. Like it's not the same
Like
perpetualization.
a lawnmower, it doesn't care if it sits in the middle of the field.
A lawnmower is not really a lawnmower. It's just a motor with a couple of blades that happens to be good at mowing lawns.
Yeah, but I mean, as a machine.
Do you know what I mean? Like it's incidental to it. It didn't evolve.
Yeah, I know.
In the environment of needing to.
That's why I pointed to that, because that's an obvious example of something that doesn't
Right.
care whether there's nutritious vegetables being grown nearby.
Right, like it's all it cares about is guzzling fucking
Gas.
burnable shit.
Mm-hmm. True
So we're
story.
on the same page, yeah.
So we've got 20 minutes left to kind
Okay.
of recap and all this.
So
and,
this is why I wanted to go into the affect diagram. So if you can pull that up.
and we wanted to go into what are we going to do about all of this?
Right.
What do? So I think I affect here. No. Surely it's somewhere.
Ah.
Here we go.
So yeah, the reason this is coming up is primarily because altruism is part of the circuit, and so this circuit is important as something to recognize before any kind of letting go of the ego. The not necessarily in all the inner workings of it, which I can understand could be seen as overcomplicated, and
So-
that's not the point.
And also, this is like version 2 of the chart.
Yes.
Version 1, and I should probably recreate this, honestly, but to the right side of this, we've added now greed, hatred, negligence, like
And
these-
narrative.
right. These extra narratives on top.
And
I
on top
guess.
of the responses of aversion, responses of attachments, and responses of callousness, we then have narratives
Right.
of negligence, narratives of hatred, and narratives of greed. So that's the whole point there. And why this is important in this context is that this is where we find a way to build the alternative landing pad, if you will, onto which to land once egos let go. So before that can be done properly, this element of the process should be recognized as a constituent. So what are we saying here is that there has to be a couple of steps taken to dislodge one's empathy with artifacts and one's sympathy to narratives, and vice versa to increase one's empathy to narrative.
Right.
In that all things land in narrative. This is where the empathy comes from. You can relate to another person by the fact of sharing delusions, if you will, and conversely, be sympathetic to what those delusions produce as perceivable things that get recuperated into our daily lives. So today this happened, and these objects were created, these objects ceased to be, this person was born, this person died, and so on and so forth. We all go through narratives of gain, loss, life, and death, hence the empathy. But this person is not you. That object is not yours. This object is yours. This person is you. So on and so forth. There is all of these
Right.
different
It's a divide,
ways
sort
to see the narratives that are coming out, and those are the artifacts. But the fact of narrative remains consistent throughout. And so, with this turn of interpretation,
Right.
one lands themselves into the not making the narratives themselves the focus,
Primacy.
which produce the empathy to narratives doesn't produce an attachment to narratives, because all that is seen is that they produce the artifacts, right? To which one is only sympathetic in that they exist and then they don't exist, and that's just the way it is, and you can sympathize with that as life. That taken together forms this concept of altruism, which is isomorphic with the experience of what's happening through this shift in perspective. That's the altruism, at least that we're referring to. This shift into empathy and sympathy being given to the narrative, which has many shapes and forms, but ultimately happens to be about to everyone.
This narrative thing exactly evokes that mirror, the self-referential mirror in the funhouse, which points to yourself, and that is the missing narrative that we actually all share.
And it exemplifies
How can you have empathy with another being unless you understand that they are running in their own reality,
reflection of yourself,
a reflection of the same type of thing that you're doing,
right?
But it's theirs.
That's the empathy,
and they have their world and where they're coming from, and their reasons for doing things.
And overcoming that is the empathy we're discussing. Right. And the outflow of that narrative, the things that are the outcome of that narrative, is the things we say need to be sympathized with. In that,
right?
Given that this was the narrative, of course, this is the outcome.
Maybe it looks bad.
Yes, we're not saying that this is good or
this
bad.
This was bloody.
We're not. Sympathy
insane.
can be sad. Sympathy can be happy. You can be sympathetic to a bad situation in that it shouldn't have never happened. How sad. Or sympathetic. The point of sympathy is not to identify yourself with it, not to say it's good or bad. It is extrinsic. Sympathy is extrinsic. It is not to be identified with. I am not it. I did not cause it. Even if the narrative of where I participated is the cause of it, you can be empathetic with the narrative and take responsibility for the narrative in which you participated, but the outcome is the outcome. The outcome is not. It's that same feeling that we have when you can't turn back time, and so there's no amount of quote unquote regret or guilt or no emotional investment is going to change that outcome. All investment needs to be done into what the further of the narrative would be.
Right.
And so it is in that sense one has to empathize with the narrative of what is going to happen rather than the artifacts of what had happened.
Right.
So the divide between fault and responsibility isn't there. For the most part, especially if you're only regurgitating extrinsic systemic inputs as outputs, there is no possible way to empathize with the artifacts that are left behind.
Mm-hmm.
It is not correct.
Damn. Well,
and so
I propose.
I just want to finish this.
Okay.
Because what we're doing this is now we've established what altruism is. It's the correct approach to empathy and sympathy.
What altruism is.
Right.
That's the name of this episode. Maybe. I don't know.
That's a good one.
The true meaning of altruism.
Yeah, but the point is that now that we've established that there is this platform that we call altruism, and it is mainly has to do with the empathy and sympathy and the approach to the narrative and the artifact in the grand scheme of things. It is this platform, having developed it to some degree already, which you want to let into once you sever your connections to your ego. And ego here could be also described as empathetic responses to the, or rather, empathetic responses to the artifacts, the rewards and the punishments of the system driven into you, taken as being as the self-worth.
Right.
It is so. Now that you're able to disconnect from that responses, you're not looking at reward and punishment from the perspective of the system. You actually have the raw narratives and the raw artifacts from which to reconstruct everything, giving rise to what we call the polymorphic machine, one that's not driven by narrative specifically,
to map correctly.
To map and remap as necessary, which gives rise to a not a stacked version of authoritarian reward punishment, but a natural system where nature informs you've done something wrong, by like you stepped onto a rock and it hurts.
Oof.
Nature corrects you in saying, ow. Right, there it is.
Oof.
Yeah.
Flattened for your viewing pleasure.
Right. So you still see the concept of reward and punishment being fed into the whole cycle. However,
where is reward and punishment?
Coming from entropy.
Entropy. Yeah, so a punishment of sorts.
So this has to do...
An upload being reified being a reward. Where do you see reward and punishment here? So this is a flattening of the social, like...
Yeah, so instead of the system dishing out a reward and a punishment to you, you are in a situation in which your decisions directly feed into the consequences.
Oh, it's down here. I didn't see where it was written.
Sorry.
So from below. Okay.
Yeah. And the consequences are not directed by another ego. They're directed by natural processes, aka the entropic decay of nature, in the fact that it is always in entropy, in that things always decay, right? And so the reward and the punishment has to do in line with your reactions to nature itself, right? And that is captured by what you upload and unify between the members as potential, which circles back as a whole as a causal push down upon nature, which either decreases entropy, negates it, or increases it.
This is the testing of the model in reality, if you will.
Funny thing is that this is also at work with the ego stack, and so the reason the ego stack works the way it does is because the download part of this diagram, is because the download part of this diagram receives more entropic increases rather than decreases or negations. Right? So this is a strange loop right here. You're uploading things into the ether, if you will, and if you do them correctly, like if you water your own plants correctly,
Okay.
you just grow.
Yeah. Anybody.
So you negate the entropy.
Anybody who has a kind of apprehension of this type of networking
and so
should be able to understand this diagram, that you're not necessarily your effectiveness and reward in the world is not contingent on some arbitrary necessarily
structure,
ego stack structure in which you're at one layer,
feeding a particular layer, feeding an extrinsic system.
Your reward is depending on the dashboard to management above you and how well you do on that.
Rather, this dashboard comes back to nature itself, and it responds, and you don't have control. and nobody has control. There's no top ego that controls the punishment and,
Right.
and reward.
Right. So yeah,
It's the output of the whole that does that.
You're kind of introducing uncertainty fundamentally here. Again, I do believe.
Well, yes, this
but
would be uncertain to the
uncertainty being
managerial type.
introduced.
To the managerial type that wants to control accounting and numbers and everything like that.
This
Will not work.
No, right. So
This
we
is
are
unacceptable.
actually within 5 minutes of the 4-minute mark. So I'm gonna call it right now. We can't add anything more to this.
Well,
we can only summarize it up in the next couple minutes.
So the summary is this.
Anything not said,
Sorry for taking
say
over.
it. No, that's it.
So the summary is this: before the disconnect from the ego dashboard can take place in any useful manner,
Right.
one that does not wind up in either physical death.
How do we not fuck ourselves while still transitioning to some
yeah.
other system?
Physical death being you are so disheartened by the system, you rebel completely against it to the point of becoming a criminal to it, and it just annihilates you out of
Gone.
existence,
Goodbye.
which it will do.
Yes.
Second one is how to do
Happily.
it. So the second one is the mental breakdown, which will basically cause you to be, in the lowest case, to be locked away entirely. Just we don't need to hear from you.
So this is how do we deal with people?
Or to be tinkered with in the mind and completely exposed on the one hand and completely reformatted on the other.
You're talking about these mass formation, political, ideological.
Everything
Capture,
down to
rapture.
psychiatry, basically.
Right.
I am not. This is another key point. I will actually harp a lot on psychology and psychiatry, and again, this is not the kind of harping that says it's ultimately all bad. It's something that is often terrible, but not always.
Tough to go through, and we're all pushed into it, aren't we? Because it's part of schooling. If you accept this disconnection of the body from the mind,
it's a token.
Literally,
Going through therapy is a token.
Sure, it's all a bunch of tokens, which are disconnected from the body. There are symbols.
Reality is written into existence at this point.
They are symbols disconnected from their origin.
Yeah.
And that is the greatest tragedy, ladies and gentlemen.
So anyway, the takeaway is, before we really end this, is that do not attempt to kill your ego before you have altruism to fall back onto.
Right.
Do not. Save your money, save on the retreats, because all that will happen is that you will be collected or you'll die.
We've been into this theme. It is very dangerous. And so if you're going to do an ayahuasca trip down to Brazil, whatever, the Amazon, and expect your ego to be shattered and then you'll come back to normal, no, you'll probably destroy your life. But this is, a lot of people say, oh, LSD, if we just put it in the water and everybody gets LSD, then, you know what, that would be the disgustingest chaos you ever could imagine.
Again, nobody has anything to fall back onto.
Right. So how do we organize with each other? How do we organize as people? And what do we fill this gap with? And
a language.
Ladies and gentlemen, a language called Portal Mountain.
Model speak, actually.
Model speak of the Portal
Because
Mountain.
model speak can be spoken in any language.
And with that...